And now on to introducing today's speaker. Ian Chater is a diplomat candidate at the Research and Training Center for Depth Psychology in Zurich, according to C.G. Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz. In 2024, he passed his exams and is working on his final thesis, which is the focus of this presentation. He grew up in the isolated city of Perth, Western Australia. A lifelong surfer, he has traveled widely in search of waves, a pursuit that continues to bring him deep enjoyment. Literature has also been a constant passion, and he maintains a deep personal interest in the life and work of Irish poet and writer W.B. Yeats. After completing a Bachelor of Arts in Literature, Ian spent much of his 20s traveling and working overseas in varied roles, including assisting the Forest Service in British Columbia, working on film sets in India and France, and playing music on the west coast of Ireland. Returning to Australia, he completed a postgraduate degree in education and taught English and literature. During this time, he worked closely with First Nations students in disadvantaged areas of Perth. This experience eventually led to ongoing work as an Indigenous liaison, that's an official Australian title, in remote parts of Australia, and he gave us a very interesting talk about this in September 2024, the video of which is on our YouTube channel. His nearly 2 decades of work with the First Nations of the Kimberley region has been a profound influence on both his life and understanding of analytical psychology. In 2021, Ian completed a postgraduate degree in psychotherapy and has worked in private and clinical settings. He is a certified practicing psychotherapist and continues his training in Zurich while maintaining a private practice and working as an Indigenous liaison. What a bio. So take it away, Ian.
All right, I'm going to share screen, desktop. Hang on. Does that work, everyone? Can you
Yes, but
see
we're
me?
seeing, do it as a,
How's that?
there you go. That's it.
Well, thanks, Judy. Thanks to the board of CG Jung Club for having me again. I really appreciate it. And good to see democracy still alive and well in America at the start there. That's really good. Happy solstice weekend too. It's 6 a.m. where I am, so I'll be speaking up the sun and you guys, it's the end of the day, and I think you're in my tomorrow, or I'm in your. Actually, you're in my yesterday, I'm on your tomorrow. Either way, I find that interesting with a talk that's dealing with the collective unconscious and such things. So, this is the title of my thesis, which I freshly submitted to the Zentrum in Zurich about about a month ago. And so I've still got a bit to go yet to get it officially filed away and then some more exams. But so this is a distillation, this talk of the thesis. I've sort of put it in the flask and pulled out bits, and there's also some appropriate bits for your club because, as I told Judy the other day, this invitation actually helped change course with my thesis. We'll get up to that in a minute. So the outline here, I just want to get rid of this bit here so I can see. Analysis of Carl Jung's reflections on the aims and endeavors of analytical psychology, focusing on what I consider a key paragraph, which is paragraph 739 from his collected works, volume 8. Ancestral reawakenings and archetypal literary and mythological themes of the Canunctio relating to connecting with the autochthonous aspect of the self. Importance of my first analytic dream to the process of individuation. And as the great line from Yeats there, in dreams begins responsibility. And with their permission, I'm presenting 3 of my analysan's initial dreams, which I find quite interesting and related to the sort of thesis and the topic. I share a synchronicity on my journey and anecdotal evidence of an event on the path of my individuation, and then talk about the thin place of the analytic relationship and psychogeography. I'm very interested in the whole idea of psychogeography, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. So initial musings, 1914 work by W.B. Yeats, responsibilities that began with an epigraph attributed to an old play. Sort of Yeats might have been alluding to that he got it from the the other world. But the epigraph was "In dreams begins responsibility," and this is a nod to my Irish ancestry. Yeat was an Anglo-Celt like myself. I'm the fourth of four children and the only one born in Australia from an immigrant family. So I originally, the thesis had like strange working titles. I think one point it was called Surfing Numinosum, and then it was Oceania Synchronicity, and then Desert Mountain Ocean Dreaming, then Ocean Desert Dreaming, and then thankfully one night I was walking by the Rhine after bashing out a day studying at the University Library in Basel, working on the thesis, and poof, I got this idea in my head, Nights in Dreams begins responsibility. And I first heard that line, not through Yeats, but actually through U2. It was on their Actung Baby album. I think the song Acrobat had that lyric, and I always liked it and then found it was from Yeats. And so anyway, that's how I got to that. And I just also want to share that the title Autochthonous actually had indigenous self, and it was never really sitting well with me. And my friend, the Australian writer and musician and poet Gregory Day, said, I think what you're talking about is autochthonous. And Judy, this might help you. He said, just think of TikTok every time you got to say it. So autochthonous. And I remember I had read that term a few times in Jung's collected works, and bang, that fell into place. And it's you're just lucky, aren't you, that these things start appearing when they're meant to appear or at the right time. I just want this quote. I love this quote. Russ Lockhart, I heard this on Laura London's Speaking of Jung podcast. Interesting group of 16, see episode 16, April 2016. Ross Lockhart, I believe he's an American analyst in your neck of the woods, and he said this quote, and it's been something I really appreciate. He said, I can't give what I would call a traditional Jungian lecture. That's clear. I have to give a lecture that comes out of the living experience of my own unconscious, and that's what this talk will be about. And I just want to acknowledge Tom Elsner, uh, a good guy, a really good guy. I was so lucky to meet him. My second block course in Zurich, he delivered a lecture. He was a former student at the Centrum. And it was an incredible lecture about the Rime of the Ancient Mariner material. And, we became mates, and it was incredible to meet a surfer in Switzerland. And, we would walk around in the hills, and I'm sure the other students and stuff thought we were nuts, like these two guys talking about surfing all the time. And I was deeply saddened by Tom's loss. He was going to be my supervisor. And yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge Tom and get his spirit in the house. He was a really good guy, and I think of him all the time. God bless him. So, initial musing. So, I told Judy the other day. So, this dream happened on the 14th of the 7th, 25. And at this point, uh, I'm still in this sort of surfing world. I had this dream, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting dream. Went down the beach. I was in a shack, spending time down by the coast. And I wonder what this dream's about. Went back to my little shack, opened the emails, and there was an email from Judy going, hey, Ian, would you think about doing another talk for the CG Young Club of Orange County? I was like, oh, hello. All right, something's happening here. And so it's one of those ones where there's definitely a synchronicity to me because the dream happened. I get this email from Judy, and then this, and I'm very grateful to say that this dream and that invitation sort of helped me change tack with my thesis. So I'll just read out the dream to you, and here it is. I'm walking down a street in America, listening to a song by the band REM, and the song's called Oddfellows Local 151. It's from their Document album. I'm feeling good. I'm on a walking tour with some people, and I am the guide. I notice one woman in the group. I tell them how clear the lakes ahead of us used to be before being polluted by industrial America. The waters were crystal, pristine waters once. The woman I notice comes nearer, and we start talking about the Herman Melville novel Moby Dick. She asks me what the first three chapters are. I say, I think it's Looming's Carpet Bag and Spout is in. And then I ask her, is that third one the Queequeg one? And she replies, maybe. And if you know the third one properly, I may marry you. So yeah, this dream was like very important dream. I just got some notes on this dream here. I'll just go to it. Sorry, just back a bit. Um, Now REM, really important band for me growing up. One of my favorite bands. Obviously the acronym Rapid Eye Movement refers to the dreaming stage of sleep itself, and so it's a dream about music and dream states. Music is feeling. Um, I really liked REM. Document was a pretty good record. It's their last one with IRS before they went to the big Warner Brothers. I preferred other albums of theirs, like Fables of the Reconstruction and Murmur. And even more interesting is that Oddfellows Local 151. No offense to any hardcore REM fans out there, but I would always skip that song. I just didn't really like it. I found it a bit dirgy and like a jam that they just put lyrics on. And I thought this is really interesting in the context of this dream because they talk about the path to redemption is through developing your inferior function, or the gold is in the poo, so to speak, in the dross. And it's interesting that this song, so in this unwanted aspect of the album or the text, is where the gold might be. For me as an intuitive, my sensation function is definitely the inferior function. So to do talks like this and to sort of really, get back into reality is a struggle, but it's part of my redemption, I suppose. As they say in Zurich, the path to redemption is through developing your inferior function. Um, yeah, just very interesting. I'll just go to this next bit here. I'm just going to change slides. And there's the Oddfellows America symbol. Now, Oddfellows, the Independent Order of Oddfellows in America, a non-political, non-sectarian fraternal organization founded in Baltimore, Maryland in 1819, operating under the motto Friendship, Love, and Truth. The order is dedicated to global philanthropy, community service, providing member supportive social networks. So I like that idea of the three ring there, and I'll talk a bit about the axiom of Maria soon, this precept through alchemy, but just that symbol alone, friendship, love, and truth. And then obviously there's the Oddfellows term, and Oddfellows, the definition I looked up in the dictionary, unpaired or remaining strange or unusual. Its historical meaning derives from Old Norse, meaning one who puts down property or a partner in a shared venture. It's important to me in the context of what became my thesis and presentation, a partner in a shared venture. A walking tour takes time and grounded, feet are on the ground, natural movement, lakes untouched and clean, now stained by our enlightenment. These once clear waters of the indigenous lands before rationalization and industrialization and pollution, now like murky, non-integrated complexes, need clearing up. The woman, an as yet unknown animal-like figure of some substance, is asking me the big question. Now, Moby Dick, I read that. I've read it several times. I think it's such an incredible book. Top five I've ever read, without a doubt. It's a seminal and archetypal text, and more on the theme of the Queequeg and Ishmael Canuctio later, but it goes all the way back to Gilgamesh and Enkidu. This pairing of the natural, wild human and the civilized ego-developed one. And there's this, I found that image of from chapter three, Ishmael and Queequeg sharing the bed someone had done online. I should have credited them. I'm not sure. I just found it some random like web page, fan page. But I just love that image of there's Ishmael reclining in the arms of the warrior spirit. The wedding in the dream could refer to the chemical wedding, the conjunctio of the sun and moon, the above and below worlds, and logos and eros. And in the realm of my thesis, it was the archaic natural and the rationalized consciousness are the reconciled opposites. And of course, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, we have Jung with his number one, the ego, Carl Jung, I am Carl Jung, and then the number two, that number one is the spirit of the times, and that number two, the older ancestral, and I would think the autochthonous spirit of the depths of Jung. And just relating to that, when I saw those three rings of the Oddfellows, that brought up this idea, the axiom of Maria, in our chemical studies we've had in Switzerland, a precept running like a river through the history of alchemy. One becomes two, two becomes three, and out of the third comes the one as the fourth. And it's attributed to the third century alchemist Maria Prophetessa. Jung used the axiom as a way of symbolizing the individuation process. One is unconscious wholeness, so that's that participation mystique. And you often hear about Indigenous people around the world, First Nations, there's no subject object differentiation. I am wallaby, I am tree, I am river. Two, conflict of opposites, complexia oppositorum. So that's where we're told, you hear that all the time in Jungian psychology when these two appear, you got to hold that tension. Three points to a potential resolution in the third. This third is the transcendent function, a psychic forward-striving function that arises from the tension between the opposites. So for me, that holding that tension of conscious and unconscious, or reason and instinct, and out of the third comes the one as the fourth, a transformed state of consciousness, relatively whole. And the tension of this talk or my thesis is rationalization and consciousness versus nature and the unconscious. And I wrote here, connecting with our odd fellows, the autochthonous aspect we forgot or lost. And it's wonderful later on in Moby Dick, I think he talks about this relationship he gets with Ishmael has with Queequeg as our heart's honeymoon. Just throughout my thesis and just share today, thesis stance regarding my work with First Nations people. And it's always important, I think, to be mindful and engaged with empathy through a post-colonialist lens. I'll talk about that more later, but often throughout the collected works, they're referred to as savages and such words. But being with the First Peoples, and just so you know, all these photos, apart from obviously pictures of Yeats or Jung, couldn't have taken, but these other ones are mine. I've tried to find photos that I've taken from my time in the desert that feel appropriate to the text. But being with First Peoples has amplified my connection to the landscape of Australia. And I just think curiously, but also my Anglo-Celtic heritage, especially Irish, I feel a hybrid of sorts, reconnecting with my autochthonous self, the part of me connected to nature and ancestors and unus mundus, that one world. In ancient Greece, the concept of the autochthons, people sprung from the earth itself. In mythology, autochthons are those mortals who have sprung from the soil, rocks, and trees. They are rooted and belong to the land eternally. And there's this wonderful quote of Yeats from 1955. I think it's from his fairy tales, folklore, and myth book. I'm not sure, but I can help if anyone's curious later. But the quote is this: have not all races had their first unity from a mythology that marries them to rock and hill? Have not all races had their first unity from a mythology that marries them to rock and hill? It's just, I love that line. So here's a couple of examples where Jung uses the term. So from Psychology and Religion, East and West, Collected Works 11, paragraph 88. Even dreams are made of collective material to a very high degree. Just as in the mythology and folklore of different peoples, certain motifs repeat themselves in almost identical forms. I have called these motifs archetypes, and by this I mean forms or images of a collective nature which occur practically all over the earth as constituents of myths and at the same time as autochthonous, excuse me, individual products of unconscious origin. The archetypal motifs presumably derive from patterns of the human mind that are transmitted not only by tradition and migration, but also by heredity. So he's got this autochthonous aspect, has these three, tradition. So you think about the traditions of a culture or a race, migration, where I might come in, sort of migrating across to this other land, but also by heredity. And it's very interesting. Then this is a longer quote here. This is a photo I took of a beach after some erosion. You can see all the tree up above and all the different strata below it. This is from the Psychology of the Child Archetype, Collected Works 9, 1, paragraph 262. Modern psychology treats the products of unconscious fantasy activity as self-portraits of what is going on in the unconscious, or as statements of the unconscious psyche about itself, and they fall into two categories. First, fantasies, including dreams of a personal character, which go back unquestionably to personal experiences, things forgotten or repressed, and can thus be completely explained by individual anamnesis. So that's, working out stuff with your therapist, having a chat, looking at it, sort of that manifest content, we might say. And then second, fantasies, including dreams of an impersonal character, which cannot be reduced to experiences in the individual's past, and thus cannot be explained as something individually acquired. These fantasy images undoubtedly have their closest analogues in mythological types. We must therefore assume that they correspond to certain collective and not personal structural elements of the human psyche in general, and like the morphological elements of the human body are inherited, although tradition and transmission by migration certainly play a part, There are, as we have said, very many cases that cannot be accounted for in this way and drive us to the hypothesis of autochthonous revival. These cases are so numerous that we're obliged to assume the existence of a collective psychic substratum, and I've called this the collective unconscious. Um, I love that idea of autochthonous revival. So it's in us and it gets revived, and it's revived, you would think, coming up through the dreams for a reason, the self, there's some inherent healing tendency, something wants to be understood, to think about it simply like that, wants to be made known. So I'm just going to move in now to some Jungian, some definitions here, Jungian and First People's understandings. That's a what you might call a tornado in the desert. We call them, or the Aboriginal people, First Nations call them willy willies. And there's a lot of myth about them. And then one of the chapters of my thesis is about a very powerful dream I had with a giant willy willy with at the head of a like a very dark god in it. Anyway, onto a quote here of individuation. I've sort of chosen this, obviously hundreds of quotes where Jung talks about individuation or the collective unconscious, and I've tried to find ones that seem relevant to this talk. So individuation from Collected Works 9i paras 522, 523, Jung says here, conscious and unconscious do not make a whole when one of them is suppressed and injured by the other. If they must contend, let at least be a fair fight with equal rights on both sides. Both are aspects of life. Consciousness should defend its reason and protect itself, and the chaotic life of the unconscious should be given the chance of having its way too, as much of it as we can stand. So this means open conflict and open collaboration at once. That evidently is the way human life should be. It is the age-old game of hammer and anvil. Between them, the patient iron is forged into an indestructible whole, an individual. This roughly is what I mean by the individuation process. And I love that quote, fair fight between the unconscious and the conscious. And I just, on this, one of the readers of my thesis in Switzerland actually analysed with Marie-Louise von France, and she wrote back to me after she read my thesis, and she shared this, and she just said this. So Marie-Louise one day von France had generously shared with her a recollection of their time working together that remained with her. And she said that von France one day, just in passing, mentioned, oh, people who were destined for individuation. And for my thesis reader, this implied that not everyone is called to the path of individuation. It instilled in her a lifelong respect for individuation as something bound to destiny and true calling, rather than a chosen goal or deliberate program of psychological development. And it is in this spirit that I understand Jung's concept of individuation, not as a self-improvement project, but as a moral response, in brackets, in dreams begins responsibility, to an inner calling that is once heard, it cannot easily be refused, nor should be denied. So just a couple of First Nation Australian concepts that I'm not saying they're the same thing, but they're really interesting. Just to throw into the soup of comparative religions and mythologies. So the idea of the dreaming, it's not the dream time, it's the dreaming, it's a present tense occurrence. So Indigenous Australians' worldview describes an every when. That's a term from Stanner. So I love that term, every when, in which ancestral beings created and continue to create the land, life, law, and moral order. Rather than a distant past, it is an ongoing reality that shapes relationships between people, country, and the spiritual realm. So you'll hear a lot of terms, First Nations Australian, they talk about country, like I've got to get back on country or country speaking. And so that to them is the land is alive. It's not just like, matter that's dead. It's like, I'm going back on country to get well. It's like, so that's where the ancestors are. That's where their living connection is. And so through the dreaming, law, identity, and responsibility are embedded in the landscape, ceremony, and everyday life. And songlines. So songlines are complex indigenous knowledge systems that encode the journeys of ancestral beings across country through song, story, ceremony, and performance. They operate as navigational, ecological, spiritual, and cultural frameworks, informing custodianship responsibilities, kinship relations, law, and the transmission of intergenerational knowledge. Songline knowledge is learned through elders, lived experience, and ongoing relationships with country. As embodied systems of memory and practice, songlines sustain cultural continuity, identity, and belonging, while reinforcing reciprocal obligations between people, place, and ancestral knowledge. Disconnection from these systems may contribute to cultural fragmentation and diminished connection to land, community, and identity. And I once asked an elder about 10 years ago, very knowledgeable, sort of real bushman, elder of his mob, and I said, one of the things I've done in my role, I haven't asked for their secrets or if they invite me to places, sometimes I don't go. And I always often think, how would people in Zurich or whatever feel if a busload of First Nations people said, show us the Black Madonna or show us the cathedral. And, so you've got to have some empathy for their secret world. But anyway, I asked this guy one day, about it. He just looked at me and he just said, know your songline, Ian, know your country. And that's all he said. And I often think that songline is our individuation path, and you know your country. So you got to know, if you know your path, you got to know what you're connected to. There's a bit of Aboriginal here. Moja Amari Boraja, Nu Boringa Amari Moja. And the literal translation of this is forgotten I lost dreaming. The country I left forgotten lost. And paraphrased is he who loses his dreaming is lost. And there's a picture of the moon rising up over the fringes of the Great Sandy Desert. And this is from a wonderful book called Songs for the Songmen, Aboriginal Myths Retold by Harney and Elkin from 1968. Collective unconscious, objective psyche. Often they call it interchangeably. The collective unconscious appears to consist of mythological motifs or primordial images, for which reason the myths of all nations are its real exponents. In fact, the whole of mythology could be taken as a sort of projection of the collective unconscious. The personal unconscious is made up essentially of contents which have one time been conscious, but which have disappeared from consciousness through having been forgotten or repressed. The contents of the collective unconscious have never been in consciousness and therefore have never been individually acquired, but owe their existence exclusively to heredity. Once again, he's saying that it's made up essentially of archetypes. I think in all my years of study, this is my favorite quote, or one of my favorite quotes of Jung. It's just so powerful and so simple, and it says so much to me. I've titled this "The Dreaming in the Autochthonous Realm." And this is from his Dream Symbols of the Individuation Process note to the seminars given by Jung in Bailey Island in New York. And it's quite a simple statement, but he says this: we must assume that the dream process, that process that causes a dream to be, that carries a dream, takes place continuously as a stream of psychical life that happens in us or which we contact. Only occasionally, however, under certain circumstances, do we become aware of it. That occurrence which is represented in a dream is just one event in a stream that goes on all the time. So you can catch a dream even in the daytime when you are conscious. And I often think of that Talking Head songs that once in a lifetime, that line, there is a river underground. And you think about the dreaming as the 40, 50, 60,000 years of that people's connection to country. They had this idea it's a present tense everywhere. And you got Jung here saying it's going on all the time. And of course, how do we dip our fishing rods into it or catch it? I suppose through dreams or fantasies or active imagination. But I very really, when I remember reading that quote, it was like, oh, wow, so powerful and so simple. So I'm just going to go into now the main quote, which I sort of base the architecture of my thesis around. It's from Collected Works, Volume 8, The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche. And I think the essay is Analytical Psychology and Weltanschauung. And apologies to any Swiss colleagues that might hear me say that. Weltanschauung, loosely translated as worldview, though they tell me it's much more than that. But would be a way, perhaps, just for this talk of understanding or seeing oneself in the world. And it's paragraph 739. And, Jung said, I read once, he who has the symbol has the passage. And in my research for the thesis, when I read this paragraph, I went, "Oh, that's it. I think I can build my work around this." And I'll read this. I'll break it down into four segments, and this is the first part. I took that picture of Jung. I was in Switzerland for 4 months working on my thesis last Europe Northern Hemisphere winter, and there was a wonderful exhibition on at the museum in Zurich there, and there was a photo I took of him there. And here he is, Jung here. Analytical psychology is reaction against the exaggerated rationalization of consciousness, which, seeking to control nature, isolates itself from her and so robs man of his own natural history. He finds himself transplanted into a limited present consisting of the short span between birth and death. I've just got some notes on each of these slides. So, a reaction, many things Jungian, a reaction or a compensation in the self-regulation of the psyche's teleological, it's that forward striving function for balance and wholeness. The tension, if held, creates forward movement. Exaggerated rationalization, it sort of begets one-sidedness, no roots, all logos and differentiation. There's not enough eros or relationship. It's all thinking with the head. As the Hopi elder Mountain Lake said to Jung, white men are always searching for something, thinking with the head, not the heart. The age of reason and enlightenment was a domination of the natural world and a distancing from nature, not a petitioning for friendship or eros with nature or the unconscious. Exaggerated rationalization is like that of a conscious soul on the journey of life, such as Ishmael or Gilgamesh, without the wedding of the autochthonous aspect that makes us truly whole, with a humble and more timeless attitude. We can approach the numinous, I really feel, with the Oddfellows by our side. Isolated from nature, we are robbed of our natural history. That means we're disconnected from the religious attitude and relationship to the archetypes. We're at their will, and we'll call it fate. Something bigger than the ego is at play. Jung called it the self. And I always think that wonderful line of Jung's. I used to write it on the whiteboard at a hospital I worked at, addiction and sort of trauma recovery hospital. I would write before my classes, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And so this idea of being transplanted into a limited present, not with its roots, and my first analytic dreams spoke of this and more on that later, but the short span between birth and death. So there's no religiosity, nothing humanist, no connection to the Great Spirit, as our First Nation friends may say. And remember, Jung reminding us the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. The second part of the quote: this limitation creates a feeling that he is a haphazard creature without meaning, and it is this feeling that prevents him from living his life with the intensity it demands if it is to be enjoyed to the full. Life becomes stale and is no longer the exponent of the complete man. That is why so much unlived life falls into the unconscious. People live as though they were walking in shoes too small for them. And my notes on this are: feelings have been haphazard creatures without meaning. And Jung said famously, man cannot stand a meaningless life. So how do we live life to the full with the intensity it demands? Because individuation is, and I felt it personally, it's a moral task. W.B. Yeats wrote, in dreams begin responsibility. So we must take dreams seriously. We have to deal with the shadow, relate to the anima or animus, and develop the inferior function, which is often carried by the anima and animus. And for me, doing these talks and a Jungian analytic diploma is really hard graft, but it's helped me develop my sensation function. I'm a card-carrying intuitive, and I'm often at odds with sensation and reality. My intuition has to be made accountable, and my inferior sensation function has to be brought into the outer world of responsibility and reality. And that line of Jung's, where lives that are stale and not exponents of the complete person. It is a life gone bad. It's split off. It's not complete, moldy, no effervescence or vitality, and an abaissement de nouveau mental, that sort of loss of soul. And so much unlived life falls into the unconscious. So we think of projections. Once stuff is, it's not in consciousness. It just falls down into the dark. It becomes neurosis and complexes. It's split off. And as that line of Jung's where he once said, nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. Our unrealized dreams and aspirations fall by the wayside and become complexes because collective consciousness pressures, or the ego and persona thought you needed the new house or the partner or the divorce or the new car or the diet or the job, etc. And encountering the self is always a defeat for the ego, and I put in brackets here, if you encounter it. People live as though walking in shoes too small for them, too tight, squeezed, not meant for you. Individuation, I think, is about finding the right vocational shoes. You can't walk properly if you don't. The slipper must fit and allow for natural growth. And Von France, in her book, The Archetypal Patterns and Fairy Tales, Amplifying Shoes, said they generally have to do with one standpoint in life. For instance, in German, we say that when a boy or girl grows up, they should put off their childhood shoes. Or if a son follows exactly the life pattern of his father, we say he steps into his father's shoes. And if a woman has her husband completely under her thumb, we say he's under the slipper. This is a powerful section of the quote here. The quality of eternity, which is so characteristic of the life of primitive man, is entirely lacking. Hemmed round by rationalistic walls, we are cut off from the eternity of nature. Analytical psychology, brackets Jungian psychology, seeks to break through these walls by digging up again the fantasy images of the unconscious, which our rationalism has rejected. These images lie beyond the walls. They are part of the nature in us, which apparently lies buried in our past and against which we have barricaded ourselves behind the walls of reason. And someone I quote a lot, and probably one of the more important books I've read in my journey is Vine Deloria Jr.'s book, C.G. Jung and the Sioux Traditions, a First Nations academic from America. And he took great umbrage to being called, savages and primitive man, as it's worth remembering that. So, like I said, we could call them Indigenous or First Nations. I think the Jungian scholar Sonu Shamdasani once said that Jung and those guys were just using the Victorian like language of their time. And just going back to the quote, there's no acknowledgement, in the belief of synchronicity or the wisdom of dreams or nature's gifts if we ham it off. And I just think this famous quote of Jung's is worth repeating here from his 1959 face-to-face interview. He was asked if he believed in God, and he replied, I know. I don't need to believe, I know. And he later clarified that by saying, rather than subscribing to a specific religious dogma, he recognized God as an overpowering, unknown psychological reality with the human experience. And just going back to the quote itself, if nature becomes a resource, we are separated from it. Analytical psychology breaks through the hemmed-in walls of rationality, thus embraces the irrational, to me best understood by embracing and accepting that the world is full of paradoxes and antinomies, and that is nature. Analytical psychology cuts through the one-sidedness and isms and sees that everything has an opposite, the complexio oppositorum, the paradoxical totality of the lunar and solar worlds, man and woman, night and day. The Sioux, and this is a quote from Vine Deloria here, from his C.G. Jung and the Sioux Traditions. The Sioux open themselves to communication from nature, allowing nature to speak to them in dreams and visions, birds, animals, and even rocks, each representing the higher spiritual powers, educated the people about the structure of reality. And I also think here of William Blake's opening lines from his poem, The Auguries of Innocence, and very famous lines, and they are this: to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Um, an Aboriginal fellow out in the community once said to me one day, oh, don't worry about time, mate, they're just white man's numbers. And I also, one of my favorite quotes in that sort of context is that Ambassador Ryan Crocker was about the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. I think this is such a great quote. And he noted that he said, Americans might have the watches, but the Taliban have the time. And this is the last part of the quote. Analytical psychology tries to resolve the resultant conflict not by going back to nature with Rousseau and his idea, obviously, of the noble savage, but by holding on to the level of reason we have successfully reached and by enriching consciousness with a knowledge of man's psychic foundations. Now, this is a photo of a plane flying over the Great Sandy Desert. I'd actually been working in that very area that you can see below for about 2.5 weeks when I took this photo, and it just blew my mind to think that not only had I been down there, but the fact that these people had lived out there for 40,000 years. I honestly, even with all my experience today, I think I'd last a day at the most and I would perish. And yet, how these people lived out there and had mythology and families and kinship systems, it's incredible. But it's nice to think, but there I am though in a plane watching probably the latest Hollywood film in the back of someone else's chair going to Switzerland or something. So holding the tension between these two worlds and respecting them. And I've written here the notes for this slide. Not going back to nature with Rousseau means rejecting the idea that the solution to modern human problems lies in returning totally to a primitive or noble savage way of existence. Problems like inequality and alienation must be solved through reforming social and psychological structures, not by romanticizing a prelapsarian primitive past. I like that word prelapsarian, like the idea of before the fall of man. Human nature is shaped by history, culture, migration, hereditary traits, and reason, not just by an original natural goodness. We must embrace and wrestle both light and dark of the evolution of consciousness. And one of the Zentrum founders, Teo Abt, has a book called Progress Without Loss of Soul. I just think that's a great title. It's something I've carried with me in my Indigenous liaison work. And just on this idea too of like, it was better before the, Europeans got here. I was at a meeting once, and there was a bit of a pile on the white guys. Everyone was pretty upset, and I can understand that, and I often wear that. I accept their criticisms for sure. But then this one old fellow got up and he said, "Oh, you white guys aren't all bad. Like modern dentistry is heaps better. It's better than having your crooked teeth knocked out with a rock or stick." And I was, and we had a good laugh about that later. He said, "Oh, I could see you were getting picked on a bit," but he goes, "Oh, in the old days, like the dentistry," he goes, "Oh, it's heaps better now." And I just thought it was a nice way of seeing that, you know, development isn't all bad, I suppose, would have been an easy way of saying it. But, you know, this idea of Jung, it's like going forward, going back, and it's his number one and number two. He was aware who he was, but he had this other world, and that's what that thesis for me was really about, trying to bring those two worlds together. And as is the way, often when you're doing a creative work, a book lands on your lap at the right place at the right time. And I found this book in a secondhand bookstore, and I couldn't believe it. And it was C.A. Meyer, Jung's one of his close colleagues and contemporaries, and it was his book called Soul and Body: The Essays on the Theories of C.G. Jung. If you can get a copy of it, I highly recommend it. There's some good stuff in there, particularly on psi, as he called it, like synchronicity and clairvoyance. And so I'm very interested in that telekinesis. I've seen enough things in the desert to know that, I don't need to believe I know, I've seen it. And I've just written some quotes down from Meyer's book here. And on page 284, he says, "The collective unconscious, we are all equal, if not identical." It's a big line. And then this line here, this sentence or this paragraph here, "My humble answer, coming from some 50 years of experience with disordered human beings, is that with all this frantic progress in the outer world, all this terribly lopsided extroversion, we became intoxicated and forgot about our soul. Then we paid for it. Neurosis became the plague of our days, the penalty of modern man for his hubris, and here I am more in my professional field. Man is estranged from his soul, therefore from his own inner nature, by being lost in the outer world. Excessive interference with outer nature creates a necessity of disorder of the inner nature, for the two are intimately connected." I'll just leave that up there for a second while I have a drink of water. Yeah, like I said, a very good book if you can find a copy of it. Now, I've sort of thrown this up a bit of a dog's breakfast, as I may say, but I put these all up on one page. Textual examples, the archetypal union of the autochthonous and civilized, or the rational and irrational. And, there is an archetypal river running underground, suggesting collective experience and symbolic understanding of the combination of this autochthonous aspect of the self and the ego consciousness conjunctio. And on the top left-hand corner, I've got the first one up there is Gilgamesh and Enkidu. The Epic of Gilgamesh is generally considered the oldest surviving work of great literature and epic poetry, with roots dating back to Sumerian poems from 2100 to 2000 BC. The friendship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu symbolizes how companionship and relationship with the autochthonous self, symbolized by the wild man Enkidu, can form a balance between civilization and nature, and can thus transform a powerful but isolated hubristic ruler, and I've put in brackets their ego consciousness, into a wiser and more humane leader in relationship and service to the self. Enkidu was a wild man created by the gods to stop Gilgamesh from oppressing his people. Enkidu begins as a hairy wild man who lives among animals and represents the natural world before civilization. Created by the gods to balance Gilgamesh's power, he acts as Gilgamesh's equal in strength and helps curb the king's arrogance. After being introduced to the human society through his eros with a temple prostitute Shamhat, Enkidu himself undergoes a transformation from a wild being to a civilized man. And it would seem here in that context, what we might call the dark feminine is what would redeem him. And that could be that we've put it out now into that aspect of nature that we're sort of we're estranged from. His friendship with Gilgamesh changes them both, helping Gilgamesh become wiser, more compassionate, and more aware of his responsibilities. And when Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is forced to confront the reality that all humans are mortal. This loss drives Gilgamesh's search for meaning and immortality, making Enkidu's death a turning point in the epic and highlighting the themes of friendship, civilization, and mortality, almost a bit like the Oddfellows, The Three Rings. Um, I've read all these books, and so I haven't read a few of them for a while, but Moby Dick I reread again in the last year, and I just sewed notes on Moby Dick. It's funny when you go to the Zentrum, they have a little portable library that comes with it. And the first book I ever grabbed at my first ever block course was Edward Edinger's Moby Dick and American Nekia. Nekia, that word for the night sea journey or the descent. And it's funny looking back now. I was like, isn't it interesting? That was the first book I grabbed. It's Edinger is incredible. And in Moby Dick, in that chapter 3, they share a bed, the unconscious realm of sleep or dreams, and this all takes place at Peter Coffin's Spouters Inn, and the coffin or the sarcophagus, it's a vessel of transformation. And I know this well because in my Swiss fairy tale exam for the proper Deuticum, I nearly slipped up because there was this sort of character like a wise old man with a zither, and he went into a coffin, and luckily that's right, it can transform, symbolic death. And but I always thought that was interesting, Melville's genius to place that scene at Peter Coffin's Spouters Inn. In Moby Dick, Ishmael and Queequeg can be interpreted through Jungian lenses complementary aspects of the psyche. Ishmael represents the conscious ego searching for meaning, identity, and order in a confusing world, while Queequeg symbolizes the aspects of Ishmael's shadow and deeper instinctive self that Western society often rejects or misunderstands. As an autochthonous figure, one deeply rooted in his own ancestral culture and spiritual traditions, Queequeg embodies forms of wisdom that lie outside the boundaries of Western rationalism. Their unlikely friendship reflects the Jungian process of individuation, in which the ego grows by accepting and integrating unfamiliar or repressed aspects of the personality. Through Queequeg, Ishmael gains not only tolerance and spiritual openness, but also exposure to courage, self-reliance, generosity, loyalty, and a profound sense of human equality. Queequeg's calm dignity, skill, and unwavering moral character challenges Ishmael's assumptions about civilization and archaic man, suggesting that psychological wholeness emerges through the integration of diverse, rational, and autochthonous aspects of the self. Ishmael remarks to himself in chapter 3, I really like this line, that it is better to sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian. I find Melville very funny at times. Ishmael and Queequeg go to sleep in the bed together, and Ishmael remarks later that he never slept better in his life. He had a sense of wholeness, perhaps, and he had assimilated that chthonic warrior aspect for the descent ahead, the Nekia, the night sea journey. This next book was recommended to me. Actually, I was also at my first block course, but it was a guest lecturer. He's an American analyst from your neck of the woods, Charles Zeltzer, and he gave me some really great advice at my first block course. And one of them was he told me what a great book Zorba the Greek was, and I'd obviously seen the film, but I read the book. So Zorba the Greek, Nikos Kazantzakis, the author. It's set on an island, Crete, and interesting in my early dreams analysis, I had lots of dreams of islands, and I think it's a bit of split off psychogeography, not the mainland continent of Europe. And I often think of these, and you think of Homer's Odyssey, all these different islands Homer has to get through, sort of almost like complexes to be depotentiated and dealt with on his, as I called it, a sort of homecoming back to the self, to Penelope and Ithaca. And in Jung, Collective Works 8, paragraph 210, he talks about complexes and he says the via regia to the unconscious, however, is not the dream as Freud thought, but the complex, which is the architect of dreams and of symptoms. And obviously, Crete, though, too, is the birthplace of Zeus. So it's a very powerful realm here where this text takes place. And there's just a few notes on it here. Basil is the name given to the unnamed narrator in the film, represents the Apollonian qualities of reason, education, intellect, restraint, and self-consciousness. He's thoughtful and analytical, but often immobilized by overthinking, um, you know, overrated consciousness, as Jung might call it, and hesitation. He lives primarily through ideas rather than direct experience. But Zorba, on the other hand, represents a Dionysian principle, instinct, passion, sensuality, embodiment, spontaneity. and engagement with life. He embraces eros, work, music, dance, pleasure, and suffering without excessive reflection. He teaches Basil not to merely dance, but to inhabit life directly, and their relationship forms a classic philosophical and psychological contrast: mind versus body, reflection versus action, culture versus nature, restraint versus vitality. This tension between reason and instinct is central to the text's exploration of what it means to live fully. Although I just wanted to note, though, the limited agency and the patriarchal frame granted to the female characters in the text was something I found a bit difficult, but maybe it was a reflection of the time. But I just wanted to note that. One of my favorite books is next, Hermann Hesse's Narcissus and Goldmund. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. Steppenwolf could have got a Guernsey here, so to say, but I think Steppenwolf was not just about the character simulating his wolf aspects, but when he goes to the Magic Theatre, he realizes he has lots of aspects. But in Narcissus and Goldmund, there's definitely an opposition of the two, and it's a novel set in the medieval period that follows two close friends who pursue radically different paths. Narcissus represents intellect, order, and spiritual discipline, while Goldmund embodies instinct, sensuality, creativity, and lived experience. And from a Jungian perspective, their relationship symbolizes the tension between opposing psychic forces and the process of individuation. Their friendship suggests that psychological wholeness arises not from identifying exclusively with one mode of being, but through the integration of spirit and instinct, consciousness and the unconscious, and wisdom and life affirming sensuality. And one could say the combination of this otherworldly wisdom with the life affirming sensuality, it only creates wholeness in the relationship to one another. Uh, we've got next here is, so I put this in here, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Mark Twain, Mark Twain. Read the author. I read this book to my parts of this book to my eldest nephew by Australia's like Mississippi, the Murray River. And I've just written here, look, I feel it's best to leave to Americans to understand what they think of this seminal text regard to the shadows of slavery. And I know in academia in America, it's been looked at very disdainfully, but some people think the reason it's disdainful is why we got to look at it. But I won't get into all that stuff. But for me, in the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Huck's friendship with Jim fosters a growing moral awareness that challenges the racist and pro-slavery values that he's sort of been forced to inherit. And through their journey together, Huck comes to recognize Jim's humanity and ultimately chooses personal loyalty and conscience over the societal norms of his time. And I wrote here, I just remember when I read this book that heart triumphs head on their raft on the river of life, and it bodes for a better future for all. And the next text here, D.H. Lawrence, Lady Chatterley's lover. Um, Obviously, her gamekeeper lover, Oliver Mellors. It's a pretty powerful story. I've just written here, Connie Chatterley can be read as an ego estranged from instinctive life, while Mellors embodies qualities emerging from the unconscious, nature, sexuality, and emotional authenticity. Their relationship symbolizes the integration of previously divided aspects of the self, suggesting a movement towards individuation. Mellors can further be understood, I think, as a stage of an animus figure's development through whom Connie encounters and integrates neglected dimensions of her own psyche. Yet Lawrence's concern is not solely psychological in the book. It's not all just about wholeness, but I think he's really it's a critique of industrial modernity and advocates for the restoration of genuine human vitality. And the last one, I just threw this one in the other day, actually, Han Solo and Chewbacca, the archetype of the trickster. Han Solo with his hairy offsider. And we all know that wasn't Lucas, and those guys were heavily into Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces, or what it was called in mythology. But I hope they're just some examples, and maybe at the end, I'm sure you guys will have some too. I think Don Quixote could have been in here as well, and I'm sure there's a few other famous ones. And I just wrote here, Jung here being slightly prescient or psychic even. He wrote in 19, sort of in the Zarathustra Notes in the Seminars, given in 1934, sorry, to 1939. Jung writes, one cannot individuate without being with other human beings. One cannot individuate on top of Mount Everest or in a cave somewhere where one doesn't see people for 70 years. One can only individuate with or against something or somebody. Being an individual is always a link in the chain. It is not an absolutely detached situation in itself, only with no connection outside. And then, of course, 20 odd years later, 1953, New Zealander Edmund Hillary and Nepali Indian Sherpa, Autochthonous, indigenous to that place, they're the first climbers to reach the summit of Mount Everest. And I love those two photos I found on the internet of, they're great pictures, aren't they? They look, Melville talks about Koikeg and Ishmael, a Hart's honeymoon. They look like great friends. And yeah, I love that picture. This is a bit sort of heavier material here, but Arthur Boyd, Australian painter, he had a series of paintings from 1957 to 1960 called the Bride series. During a trip to Central Australia, Boyd was deeply disturbed by the impoverished conditions and disenfranchisement of Aboriginal peoples living in shanty towns. He saw a group of Aboriginal brides wearing white wedding dresses being transported like livestock in the back of a truck. It's like a scene out of a Cormac McCarthy novel, isn't it? Boyd's bride paintings were created during one of the darkest chapters of Australia's history, the era of the stolen generations, when children of mixed heritage were forcibly removed from their families under the federal assimilation policy. This historical shadow was embedded in the bruised and sometimes brutal imagery of the series. The paintings carry Boyd's characteristic symbolic vocabulary, a luminous scarab beetle signifying rebirth. And it's also the symbol of the Zentrum, where we study in Switzerland. The middle photo of the shooter, it's hard to see on this size, but on his left cheek there's actually a scarab. There's hybrid rams and oxes suggesting primal fertility, a crow or a raven as harbingers of death. Taken together, these images register something of the complex and wounded psyches of 1950s Australia, a nation half asleep to its own immense shadow, dreaming uneasily in the confused, ingenious loci of the great dividing range between awareness of its cruelty and potential for teleological healing and development through assimilation of the gifts of the indigenous ways of being on this land. The bride and groom stand not only as figures of historical injustice, but as archetypal forces inviting Australia to confront the disowned parts of its collective self. Arthur Boyd went into the objective psyche with his works, and I wrote here, and this is part of my thesis. He found a treasure. They often say the treasure hard to attain, and I use the terms a treasure brutal to attain. And I think this series really resonates. It's archetypal. It's interesting when I did my postgraduate degree to become a teacher, you had to do a 7-week teaching prac, and the subject that I created for these students was I did this bride series, and I look back now and like this is before I even started working with them. It's one of these other whiffs and hints, as I called it, and Tom Elser and I talked about these things in your life that have a lot of affect and heat, and this was always something for me. So it's this the wounding in me as well, to find this autochthonous aspect. But I worked on these pictures and I looked at them a lot. One of my chapters in my thesis is about these paintings, and I did an active imagination with the painter Arthur Boyd. I was at a library outside Basel, and across the Rhine, you could sort of see what they call the Black Forest, in Germany. I found the furthest point in the distance, like a vanishing point, and I haven't used active imaginations all as much as I probably could or should. I've dreamt enough to keep me busy, but this was a very, very powerful experience. I felt like I had this direct line, and yeah, it's just something that these paintings have always really moved me. And obviously, I've talked about it before. And America has the same ongoing concerns as does Canada and a number of other countries, and I just wrote here, so on the left, the painting on the left, the bride with the red dress on, that's called Half Caste Child. The one in the middle is called Persecuted Lovers, and the one on the right is called Bride Running Away. And I just wrote here, the onomatopoeia of Indigenous language is the gift of the flower. So in that middle one, he's about to get his brains blown out, but the Indigenous fellow is offering up this gift of flowers from his ears. And one thing I've noticed in all my work particularly in the Great Sandy Desert with the First Nations out there, is a beautiful onomatopoeic language. It sings in a real reciprocity to the landscape and the birds, and it feels like the language is part of the land itself. And I've always felt like that's what his gift of the flowers through hearing, if you can only hear properly. And we have to petition the natural, irrational, and autochthonous part of us to form a relationship. And yeah, I just wanted to throw Arthur Boyd in there because it's not all it's not all happy stuff on the journey of individuation either. So I talked about this a bit last time, but I've gone back into it again because there's a lot of meaning and a lot of affect and a lot of emotion still with regards to Storm Boy for me. Um, I'm not sure if you have seen it yet, or I recommended some of you to see it, but don't watch the Hollywood remake. The 1976 version is the classic, and this great line from "You're part of this place, Storm Boy." Fingerbone Bill to Storm Boy. And the quote I've got down the bottom here is it's von Franz. I think it's originally from her book she wrote, C.G. Jung, His Myth in Our Time, but I first became aware of that quote through Teo App's wonderful book on picture interpretation. He uses it as an epigram, I think, and the quote of von Francis is this: "It is as if something somewhere were known in the form of the images, but not by us." So I'm just going to read out a few things here straight from my thesis, and I'll change those slides, but just sit with those. So there's the boy and his mate, Fingerbone Bill, and there's him with his pelican. The movie Storm Boy 1976 is a very special film in my life. It's a story of a young boy named Mike, nicknamed Storm Boy, who lives with his reclusive father, Hideaway Tom, on an isolated stretch of the liminal Coorong coastline in remote South Australia. This is a wild and beautiful landscape where it's where the Murray River comes out and it's where fresh water and salt water collide. It is worth noting that many First Nations Australians I have worked with see themselves as fresh, sweet water, and us European colonisers from afar as the salt, bitter water. The Coorong landscape is truly a psychogeographical place where the opposites come together as one. In both the 1976 film and the original 1964 novel by Colin Tearley, Stormboy's mother is already departed before the story begins, and her fate is never fully explained. The film and book only tell us that she died when Stormboy was very young. His father, Hideaway Tom's silence about Stormboy's mother suggests her death was deeply traumatic for him, but the story never provides details such as how she died or what she was like. There is just a palpable aching wound where the mother is absent, and this absence of the feminine at the exposition illustrates things are really out of whack, like we often find at the beginning of an archetypal fairy tale, where the diminished or outmoded elements are needing healing, renewal, and redemption. As the film progresses, we see through God's good grace that Mother Nature herself and the indigenous and autochthonous spirit of the land will take the missing mother's place. This is made possible via Stormboy's friendship with an Aboriginal man and the spirit of nature, as symbolized by an adopted pelican. It is worth noting that in Christian symbolism, the pelican represents Christ's self-sacrificial love, because medieval tradition said the mother pelican fed her young with her own flesh and blood. This led believers to call Jesus Nostros Pelikanos, meaning our pelican, as a poetic image of his saving sacrifice. It became a common emblem of the Eucharist and Jesus' mercy, and is also the name of an alembic flask of distillation and circulation for the quintessence in alchemy. And when I first visited Carl and Emma Jung's house at 228 Seestrasse in Kusnacht by Lake Zurich, where you can go on some wonderful tours, I was moved to see there was a pelican carving atop the beautifully tiled ultramarine green Kachelofen. That's my attempt at Swiss German there for everyone. It's an oven heater on the downstairs floor there. But on this Kachelofen, atop it, there's this pelican. And for me, it connected the Stormboy tale to Lake Zurich on my analytic and my songline journey, as I've called it. And back to the story. So, living far from society, Stormboy roams the windswept beaches and wetlands, forming a deep friendship with Fingerbone Bill, a warm and mysterious Aboriginal man who teaches him about nature, respect, and the interconnectedness of life. One day, Stormboy discovers three orphan pelican chicks. So there we've got that number three again, like the Odd Fellows and the axiom of Maria. And three is a hugely repetitive number in fairy tales. But he discovers these three orphan pelican chicks whose mother has been killed by marauding hunters. Wrote here that I always felt that these white hunter types in the text of the film were symbolic of the redneck European colonizer of Australia. They always seemed to me as a young boy to be the real savages, not the indigenous people. I completely hated the hunters in the film, sitting there complex in years in a darkened cinema as an emotional young boy watching the film. Hideaway Tommy's father is not one of the bad guys, though. He represents a more caring but ultimately wounded side of the Australian masculine psyche. Stormboy names the Pelicans Mr. Percival, Mr. Proud, and Mr. Ponder. He becomes especially attached to one pelican, Mr. Percival, who grows into a loyal and intelligent companion. And I feel here the name Percival obviously connects this movie to the archetypal depths, referring to Parzival, the mythical knight of Arthurian legend known for his purity and unwavering quest to find the Holy Grail. And this Stormboy Fingerbone Bill relationship, the boy accepts Fingerbone Bill for who he is. There's no racism or judgment. And Stormboy's puer eternus spirit is attracted to the natural man. And Fingerbone Bill for me is a real psychopomp, a mother of nature. He's like this sort of almost Hermes sort of like character. And the symbolic anthropos of the genius loci. He's like literally an embodiment of the spirit of place. He literally dances to the harmonic music and the melodies of nature. And it's a yeah, so this like I said before, so Tom Melson and I we'd had this chat, and I won't tell me what Tom, but he had these texts or things that as a child he realized once he got into analytic training, that he was getting clues. And when we're children, we're closer, aren't we, to the collective unconscious, and we're closer in a simple way of saying we're closer to the dreaming. So these are some of the original posters. I like the one on the left. His free spirit roams with his pet pelican, Mr. Percival. And his secret Aboriginal friend Fingerbone Bill. He knows no other world. And I'm just going to read out. This is direct from my thesis about my experience of what happened with me in Stormboy in the cinema. So, the world's most isolated capital city, Perth, Western Australia, 1970s. I'm 7 years old, and my mother Sheila accompanies me on the bus journey from the coastal suburbs where we live to the cinema in the city. It will be my fourth time I've seen Stormboy over the course of a few months. Such was my relentless badgering and desire to see the film on the big screen again and again. Something in the movie was completely familiar to the younger me. It was as if a higher intelligence was communicating directly with my soul through the words, sights, and sounds in the film. Stormboy was something I could completely relate to in my young life. And I was into the beach, bush, seabirds, and it was also something I instinctively and unconsciously wanted to make a deep relationship with. And that was the Aboriginal spirit of Fingerbone Bill. I never grew up with any Indigenous people. It wasn't until I sort of started playing football in my teenagers and we started meeting them. It was like this country, um, where I grew up. It was a real absence of them in the presence. They're always in the shadows. This Indigenous Hermes I wrote here is portrayed in the film by the marvelous actor David Gulpilil. He only passed away a few years ago. He's a real true natural treasure of Australia. And what was memorable is that I carried a little tissue box with me into the cinema. My mother didn't seem to bother with me taking along such items, as I was often accompanied by model airplanes from World War II that I'd glued together, or toy cars, such as my whimsy and inherent need for the transitional objects of childhood. I'm sure we would have had lollies or candy, as you say, and some such treats in hand too as the lights dimmed and the magnificent Coorong landscape came into view on the big screen. And the lysis, the ending of this film is one that still haunts me to this day. Spoiler alert here. Sorry, everyone. Mr. Percival, sorry, I got a lot of emotion too about this film. I can still feel it. Mr. Percival is shot by hunters while bravely trying to protect another group of birds, leaving Stormboy devastated by the loss of his beloved pelican companion. Heartbroken, he and Hideaway Tom return to their quiet life in the dunes, carrying the memory of their friend with them, though the world feels changed utterly, and I was always left in tears. But his Aboriginal mate Fingerbone Bill consoles him and assures him that, some things are eternal. And at that very moment in the film, this is the interesting or bizarre bit that's still trying to work out why. But at the moment in the film when Mr. Percival dies, much to the shock and astonishment of my mother, I released from my tissue box into the shrieking audience several large lizards that I captured in the forest, or bush as we call it, in the days before. My mum was totally freaked out as there's a coppertail skinks and marbled geckos and darted about and scattered themselves amongst the fallen popcorn and discarded wrappers and ultimately escaped recapture. I had set them free, or so I thought, so that something of the natural world may live on at the moment of Mr. Percival's passing. Now, the question of why I undertook such a planned and mysterious incident is one I've contemplated throughout my life, and here I am still contemplating it. It is truly that I must have felt some spirit of nature would live on in releasing my lizards at the moment of the death of Mr. Percival. And of course, the poor reptiles were in a terrible space, being freed in such a city environment far from their bush home, but I'm convinced I meant well. I wanted nature to live on, and some ancient part of me felt that I could assuage the death of Percival by unleashing my captured critters to ward off the sadness of the hero's death. I've in time since seen my Indigenous First Nation friends take the life of snakes and birds and goannas and ingest them with a quiet reverence for the natural bounty that presented to them. It is a mindful, grateful, but yet visceral taking of life. They always take just enough, no more, and many groups speak of the spirit of the animal they ingested being assimilated into the psyche of the hunter. The fact that the box my lizards were kept in was for tissues speaks of the tears that are born from deeply held, meaningful suffering. I've learnt more about my soul from the 1976 movie Storm Boy and the subsequent release of the lizards in the cinema than just about any other event of my childhood. I feel very bad, really, though, that I took the lizards from their home in the bush into the city. But is it a truism deep in my heart what the Aboriginal Autochthonous psychopomp Fingerbone Bill said to his friend? And Fingerbone Bill consoles Storm Boy, when Percival dies, and he says to him, "A bird like that never dies. Spirit is eternal." And so, just going to go now. So, first analytic dream was like nearly 10 years ago, and how are we going for time there? We're doing all right. When I yeah, I went to Jungian analyst not to become a analyst. I can assure you of that. I think it's like, to quote Tom Elson again, my life had gone snap, crackle, pop. I always like how Tom used to define that moment in your life when the wheels fall off. And it was never, ever, ever on my bingo card to become a Jungian analyst, or to attempt to become one. Uh, I was, yeah, troubled. I was having wild dreams. I felt like I was making the same mistakes in life, and I turn up and I meet my analyst, Frith Luton. I actually found Frith through the Laura London Speaking of Jung podcast, a sort of a bit of a synchronicity. I found that too. But anyway, when I turned up my first session, blah blah blah, yeah, this is happening, this is happening, and of all the things I could have dreamt of, whether it be girlfriend problems or location problems or work problems, I have this dream, and so I'll keep going back to this dream, and because I feel it's very important. There's a lot of emotion and a lot to be still learnt from it. So January 2017. There's a house with a balga grass tree, a Xanthria presi as they're known, or black boy, we used to call them as children. The grass tree is out the front of the house, under the roof eave at the front doorway. Aboriginal people live there in this house. The tree is unwell and they know they have to move it to a better spot. They know the tree is a special one. They call it a trust tree and connector tree. It's and there's one there. There's a black boy. It's terrible. We used to call them that. The Noongar people. That's the area where I grew up. They call them Balgas. But yeah, a grass tree. So it's out the front of a house. So it's not inside the houses. It's not out the back. It's in the front. It's under the roof eave, so it's slightly protected. It's at the front doorway, so it's the doorway, that sort of where the tricksters are, isn't it? That between that liminal space. And Aboriginal people live in the house, and the tree is unwell. They know they have to move it to a better spot. They know the tree is a special one. They call it a trust tree and a connector tree. And the Balga grass trees, just a little bit about them to amplify them. So for the Noongar people of southwestern Australia, where I grew up, the grass tree, known in their language as Balga, is more than just a plant. It is a vital cultural and spiritual resource. Balga has sustained generations through its remarkable versatility. Its resin was used as an adhesive and fire starter. Its long flower stalks served as spear shafts or torches, which my friends and I would fling at each other in our imaginary territory wars. Its nectar, blossoms, and eternal pulp provided food and medicine when other resources were scarce. The plant's slow growth rate and its utter resilience to bushfire, even sprouting anew after fire, reinforced its symbolism as a guardian of people and place, embodying the endurance and continuity of Noongar people's connection to country. And it's interesting, doing that psychotherapy degree when you learn about post-traumatic stress disorder and then you learn about post-traumatic growth disorder. I always think of, for me, I need a symbol. I think about the Balga was a symbol that came up for me. It actually like a lot of the Australian bush, it actually thrives on fire. So with, symbolic death, renewal. Um, and obviously trees are a really big symbol in Jungian psychology. I've got some more about that later, about Jung's. He talks about trees, but they're amazing plants. They're kind of like very furry and sort of like they're very odd. There's nothing quite like them, and they have this sort of long spear that grows out the tip of them. And they sometimes you see they stand up when they're quite old. They're like sort of standing in groups. And but yeah, I just find it interesting of all the things I could have dreamt at my first dream. I dreamt of it, so it connected me to the place where I was a child and grew up, and there's Indigenous people there, and for me, that really speaks of this connection that we can have to land. And think about places in your own life where you really, really feel deeply drawn to, or where very special things have happened to you in your life. And so I'm just going to share here the introduction to my thesis. We talked about Lady Chatterley's Love. We had a look at that before. D.H. Lawrence wrote a book in Australia. I think it's called Kangaroo. And on the way to Sydney, I believe, where he wrote, or New South Wales, he stopped off at what they called the Swan River Colony, which was Western Australia. And I found this letter that he wrote. And this is talking about the very bush where I grew up in. And he wrote, somewhat like a dream, a twilight forest that has not yet seen a day. It is too new, too vast. It needs hundreds of years yet before it can live. It is a fourth dimension, nervous, neurotic, inhabited by ghosts. I find that quite funny that, is Lawrence talking about himself here? I wonder, was he nervous and neurotic out there inhabited by his own ghost? But maybe one could say we need hundreds of years before we can understand it, and we're getting closer. I don't know. Isn't it a great letter, though? One of the great writers of his time, somewhat like a dream, a twilight forest that has not yet seen a day, which is ironic because it had been there for millennia. It is too new, too vast. It needs hundreds of years yet before it can live. It is a fourth dimension, nervous, neurotic, inhabited by ghosts. He got quite freaked out from what it sounded like. From all accounts, one could say he had a bit of a panic attack out there. But this is what happened was I had that dream and the offer from Judy, and then my thesis sort of started changing tack about a month before I went to Switzerland to work on it for 3 months. I was walking in the bush one day and I had like a download. It was like boof, like, and I got this whole prologue. And once I had that quote of Jung's, and then I had the dream, and I started, hang on a minute, this, I'm going to go down this way. And I hadn't yet had the title from Yeats, but I was walking the forest one day. I literally had this whole thesis, boof, like download, and I recorded it on a voice memo. It's pretty much verbatim became the prologue, and here it is. I'll just take a drink of water. This can still get me this bit. The wild bush is all around us. We are barefoot and shirtless, feral Antipodeans, hunting skinks and geckos, which we capture and release from our private caves we have dug in the loamy sand, far away from the eyes of the adults. We name the trees. We climb some of the ones we name, ancient jarrah trees and dusty banksias, full of wild nectar and stinging ants, while xanthorrhea grass trees we call black boys provide us with spears. I am less than 9 years old, and my friend that I play with here will be dead in 3 years, killed by a car riding home from school on his bicycle. Childhood in this bush is our natural home and heaven. I feel alive in its endless possibilities of present tense pleasure. We make up secret songs as we go along, that the adults or no one else ever hears. It is our prelapsarian private universe, and we are its sole human inhabitants. One day, some big yellow bulldozers moving down the end of the street, and within a week, all the bush we held so dear is smashed, stacked, and piled into huge funeral pyres which burn and blaze for days, filling the streets of this outlying suburb my Anglo-Celtic immigrant family call home, with an omnipotent funereal incense of eucalyptus and eviscerated dreaming. And like that, the sacred place of my childhood is gone, replaced by a four-lane freeway. Noise replaces sound. I my first meeting with the main thesis supervisor, Brigitte Jacobs, and I took this prologue to her, and she made some very good connections, but also and some ideas. But one of the connections she made, she thought I think she was generally moved by this prologue, and she said, there's a bit of sadness and trauma that connects you to these people, and I think about that bush and that the death of my good friend Michael, and it's all tied in sort of together with that sense of loss. And I just remember that line there that noise replaces sound, and literally they built a freeway through this bush, and I felt that loss keenly. And in some ways it's not just a individuation task for me to understand this. It's not a love letter, wouldn't be the right word. It's just my small way of understanding some small part of what these First Nations people have gone through. And I just like going between that image, like there they are. There's the large balgas there in the forest, and there's some they're actually bones. This was a desert landscape, but I've always called this photo Golgotha as this sort of grim sort of hill with a cattle and kangaroo bones and one dead tree and the sun setting. And just here, it's interesting. Jung obviously the trees are a big symbol in Jungian psychology. And so I've got some quotes from Jung's here. This is from Collected Works 12. Arbor Philosophica. The alchemist saw the union of the opposites under the symbol of the tree. And it is therefore not surprising that the unconscious of present day man, who no longer feels at home in this world and can base his existence neither on the past that is no more, nor on the future that is yet to be, should hark back to the symbol of the cosmic tree, rooted in this world and growing up to heaven, the tree that is also man. And in Symbols of Transformation, he said, the tree is a symbol of the self. It grows upward and downward at the same time, linking heaven and earth. Collector Works 8, the tree is a living symbol of the personality's development, rooted in the unconscious and reaching towards consciousness. And from 9, Part 1, the tree is one of the best known symbols of the process of individuation. From Man and His Symbols, the tree represents life in its fullest sense, growth, differentiation, and the union of opposites. And the tree, it is said, can grow to heaven. No tree, unless its roots reach down to hell. This is a boab tree. You see quite a lot of them in the North Australia, northwestern Australia. The locals up there call them lulgity trees. Um, to them, bountiful fruit. They eat the fruit of the baobab nuts. They also carve on them. They very interesting mythology. They're sort of upside down trees and very similar sort of creation stories to them as found with the groups in Africa that have the same trees. Once again, evidence of Jung's collective unconscious. And it's also there's a very famous tree, though, a large one of these baobabs, because some of them are huge. You can park a car inside them, and one of them was used as a prison. So when the Europeans were up there in the sort of late 19th and early 20th century, rounding up all the Aboriginal elders and young boys, basically like a genocide of sorts, really. And they sort of used to chain them up in one of these trees, these mythological trees that were really important. Some all of a sudden became a prison. And then they would ship them 2,000 kilometers away to an island. And yeah, so it's always interesting to think, it's not all optimistic and happy. A symbol can have two aspects to it, or nature can have two aspects. One day you're patting an animal and next day it bites you or whatever. But I always found it very moving. My Indigenous friends would take me to these trees, and I'd often ask them about that tree, the prison tree, and they'd sort of like, yeah, that was, it reminded me the way they deal with it. I once saw a talk with the Dalai Lama, and I actually was like it was like at an arena. He did the Dalai Lama spoke. There was like 8,000 people. That was really cool. And he walked out and everyone was clapping for about 10 minutes and he just smiled the whole time and he talked. And at the end, he answered some questions. And one of the questions he got from the audience was, Dalai Lama, Your Holiness, do you hate the Chinese? And he just started laughing. And I was like, as they might say in psychotherapy, he's deflecting with humor here. But I remember watching him, he laughed. He goes, no, 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 I don't hate the Chinese at all. They just don't know they're wrong. Thought that was a pretty good answer from the Dalai Lama. Um, Psychic mimicry. Now, I might go do this bit and then we could have a little break after, but I just want to read this quote of Jung's because this, there's the autochthonous aspect and comes up, and this is listen to this what Jung writes here in a letter to Emil Egli on the 15th of September 1943. And Jung writes, I'm deeply convinced of the unfortunately still very mysterious relationship between man to landscape. I could not substantiate it rationally, but I'm fully persuaded that if you settled a Siberian tribe for a few hundred years in Switzerland, regular Appenzeller's would come out in the end. It is probably a matter of psychic mimicry. Um, you guys can help me with this idea, like psychic mimicry. It's very interesting. So I'm going to tell you these photos that I took. So I've been lucky enough to form some friendships in Switzerland, spent some time there. And last winter, my hosts, where I was staying with, organized a trip. We went to the Appenzell region where they have the festival. So I got to go out there. It's a Saint Sylvester's New Year's tradition, and it's a unique custom where these costume figures, they known locally as the Sylvester Klaus, go from house to house to wish locals, particularly the farmers, the locals, a happy new year, bringing blessings of health and prosperity. And key aspects of this Saint Sylvester tradition in the Appenzell region of Switzerland include this. So they have two New Year's Eves. There's the traditional one that we all celebrate on the 1st of December, I'm sorry, December the 31st, so the Gregorian calendar. But then again, they have it also on January the 13th, and that's the one I attended on the old New Year based on the Julian calendar. And I found this really interesting with this quote, and then what I was working on my thesis at the time. They have two types of costumes. There's the beautiful ones, and on the right there, if you can see, I've got another couple of pictures coming up. That's a beautiful one there. They wear intricate handmade headdresses featuring detailed scenes of rural life and elegant costumes of the industry and commerce. And these are like the ones, and they have these beautiful costumes. And one group that we got to follow through, they were the local firemen, and so these incredible large headdresses. They had like models of like the village with their fire trucks putting out like little fires and stuff, and they literally would sort of in groups of, I'm not sure how many, 8 to 12, they would go to different farms and yodel and sing and do their little performance, and the farmers would come out and sort of feed them booze through like a straw or some mulled wine or whatever, and then they would jog off in this kind of choreographed timing and go off to the next farmhouse and do the same thing again. And so they're the beautiful ones. Then the ugly ones is one on the left, and I put them on the left. We always think of the left as the unconscious and the right as consciousness, but these ugly ones, they wear masks and costumes made of natural materials like fir branch, moss, and bark. So that more rational. And here's some other pictures here. So on the left, there's the ugly ones. Check those outfits out. So you've got they've all these like huge bells on them, and that's and they sort of the ugly ones march in. They're similar. The ugly ones and the beautiful ones seem to do a similar dance and movements. And then there's the beautiful ones on the right. You can see these elaborate headdresses. So, Jung's talking about, I'll bring you let's get some Siberians. And after a couple of hundred years, we could turn them into performing such and being so connected to culture as these guys. But, the ugly ones I were fascinated by. And I remember while I was there going, some of these dear old friends of mine in the Kimberley, these First Nation elders, I could easily take them to a place like this and they'd get what was going on. It wouldn't take them much to understand this symbolic world. And so it was incredible. We went up to Appenzell the night before and stayed in this sort of like lodge. And then we get up in the morning before the sun comes up, and I followed my hosts. And in fact, there's one of them there, Casper, my dear friend in the middle on the photo on the left there. And anyway, we walked up and sort of hiked out of the little town we stayed in Appenzell up to this sort of farmland. It's still dark, and just as the sun's coming up, or the first light, you can hear these bells in the distance, and there they are. And so because you don't know exactly where they're going to be, and then we just silently followed these separate groups of beautiful ones and ugly ones around as they sort of went to each farmhouse and sung these songs of good wish and prosperous Happy New Year. It was found it a very moving experience. And there's some pictures there. There's like almost like a transformed berserker, the bear skin on the left, and look at that mask. It's quite freaky. And there's a fellow. I think I managed to shake his hand. I got a picture of it with my left hand. I was yeah. Anyway, it's fascinating. But I'll just go back to that. Maybe I'll go back to that quote because, think about this. I'm deeply convinced of the unfortunately still very mysterious relationship between man to landscape. I could not substantiate it rationally, but I'm fully persuaded that if you settled a Siberian tribe for a few hundred years in Switzerland, regular Appenzellas would come out in the end. It is probably a matter of psychic mimicry. And it's interesting in, Zurich, they talk about, like von Franz's book on numbers. One of my colleagues, Christoph Lemuel, he's like awesome going down deep into that. And there's all this other sort of stuff that Jung, so to me, like Jung opened the door, and there's just so much to, like I reckon I could read Jung and von Franz for the next 20 years. I still wouldn't have read everything, and I still wouldn't know everything. It's like the more I read Jung, the less or the more I realize I don't know. But to me, there's a door opened here, and this is that line here is just there. It's probably a matter of psychic mimicry. There's a lot to be looked at with that. But maybe should we take a break there, Judy? So because then I've got some other
Yeah,
sections. Would that be okay? So
let's do that. Let's do that. Um, 10 minutes, does that feel good?
yeah, that'd be great. Should I just leave my screen on? What's the best thing to do?
Well, actually, I found something that I am going to put up if I can get it to work. Let's see. Um, I have a clock that is going to count. Can you see that? You're seeing the 10-minute timer?
Yeah,
All right, so I'm starting it.
great. I'm glad
And
there's still people there. I'll see
and
you in a
then
minute.
you should mute yourself just in case.
Okay, thank you. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
All right. Is everyone still there?
I hope so.
Isn't great. All right, it's cool.
I just
Is
before you start, I just want to mention that the American analysts that you've mentioned so far, Tom Elsner, Charles Zeltzer, Christoph Lemuel, they're all and have been in California, and they've all given talks to us, and their talks are all available on our website. Just thought I'd put in a little plug about that.
I'll tell you a quick Charles Zeltzer story at my first block course at the end. He was really nice to me actually, and at the end of the block course, he got me a ticket to see his lecture at the Psychology Club on Kundalini Yoga. But unlike the day that the director said that I was accepted into the program, Charles grabbed me, and goes, Ian, just you're a smart guy, but take your time, let her guide you. And sorry about that bad American accent. And I said, who, Charles? Like what? Ava, Irene, Brigitte, thinking about the directors, and Charles got right in my face. He goes, "No, you're Anima." So, yeah, he's been a good friend to me on the journey, and the tip off to Zorba was a really good one. But I'll continue with my talk. Thank you if you're all still here, and so we'll change tack a little bit here now. And so I've got permission. I've got three dreams to share with you. If I'm lucky, I'm fortunate enough to have mine analyses now and part of the training supervision, but I've got permission from these three people, so I'm just going to read out and why I think they're related to this autochthonous aspect of the self. And so this first one I'm going to share with you now just a little bit about the person. He's a scientist, a man, late 40s, a really I describe him as he's a good man. He's a father, partner, very empathetic fellow, very kind. Scientist. He's a business owner, but he has this deeply untapped, I would call it time limited spiritual connection to nature. Like all of a sudden he's just busy being a dad and partner and running a business, but there's this whole other aspect of him wants to spend more time in nature and some other things. And the stranger in the complex introduced immediately a part of him. But I'll read the dream first and we'll talk about it. So we're going to read some dreams now, so I'll just calm the farm a bit and we'll sit back. And so, we discuss to begin analysis, and we have our first session, and we talks about, the things in his life. And then that night he has this dream. And isn't it funny? The word complex is in the first three words. But anyway, you don't need to be Jungian analyst to see that bit. So anyway, office building complex. The person wasn't defined, couldn't see them. Because he was scared, my mood also changed. The person was still at the opposite end of the corridor trying to get into the offices. I quickly went back down, got into ours. All the lights were off. I knew the person was coming. I couldn't lock the door. For some reason, my fingers weren't working. Started panicking enough that I managed to wake myself up. Uh, One of the things he told me he never, hadn't seen like a stranger in like his dream or anything like that. So I'll just some notes about this. The stranger in the complex, in brackets, introduced immediately the part of him seeking nature. And this, obviously, I'm speaking now with the benefit of hindsight, 40 odd sessions later. But and it was also he began this research, and I called it the ballast, in a ship that keeps the ship stable. I wrote here the ballast-like roots of his European ancestry, like me, a European growing up in Australia. He couldn't lock the door to the stranger as the stranger needed to make an appearance. And the stranger too is nervous, like an unwelcome guest who was not related to his unconscious. That autochthonous part of his depths, once the stranger's now arrived, and it definitely did arrive, I'm going to show you that. And his fingers didn't work because he had to surrender. And I wrote here, we know that the encounter with the self is always a defeat for the ego. And you think about fingers, you like if your fingers don't work, you can't even do sign language. The fingers don't work. This was the door to the unconscious had to be opened up. And as the talks developed with this analysis of his dreams to own and manage, and this came up through the dreams and through the analysis. He wanted to talk about managing remote forest properties, supporting nature education for children, which is a really noble thing to aspire to, wasn't it? It's not like he wanted a huge house and a big car. This guy, one of his dreams is to literally create a space where he can teach children. He's a very accomplished scientist and rational thinker, but to enthralled by the magic of nature and to teach that to children. And that's come up. And also, here's another idea he has is extracting natural essences of indigenous plants and herbs. And I just wrote here, and funnily enough, since we've been working together, he told me this just the other day when he assured me it was okay to present this dream. That since working with me, so nearly 2 years now, he's first time in a decade taken up all his holiday pay, holiday time and overtime. Before he, too busy and sort of, I've got to work, and now it's like he's literally like smelling the flowers since we started working together. And so, just in relation to the thesis, what do I think this is important? I think this stranger heralded get out of the complex, the office building complex. You have to come in and get back. Really, the simple way to say to get back in touch with nature. So the second dream we'll look at here, just a little bit about the dreamer. It's a woman.
Excuse me,
Um,
I just want to make sure, are you in, we're not seeing a slideshow at this point.
oh,
Should
you're
we?
not seeing my slideshow?
Yeah, I think maybe yeah, you had to reshare it. I should have
Oh,
spoken
hang on one
sooner.
sec. So where would I go to for that, Judy? I'd go to, hang on,
Share,
share screen.
and then find so maybe go back and just put the first one up for us to just look at it.
Okay, hang on a sec. I'll put that up. Is that coming up
Yeah,
now?
yeah. You have to like
Is
play
that
the
full
slideshow.
screen?
Well, no, play, so go to
Yeah.
slideshow and then play.
All right, cool. And I'll go play
Yeah,
from, I'll
yeah.
just whip through it. Yeah, sorry about that. Once again, a classic example of the intuit struggling with sensation function. You just had living experience of it. And I can honestly tell you the truth. I was pretty confident in my material, but the terrifying part for me is the is this side of it. Can you see it now?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So so I'll just read out his dream again so you can see it. Office building complex. The person wasn't defined, couldn't see them because he was scared. My mood also changed. So even the unconscious is frightened. There's a there's no relation at this point to it. They're estranged from each other. They're definitely odd fellows that haven't made the like Queequeg and Ishmael haven't shared the night together. The person was still at opposite end of the corridor trying to get into the offices. I quickly went back down, got into ours. All the lights were off. So lights off, we're in the dark. One could say the unconscious, but also when you say, so I'm in the dark about something, you don't know what's going on. I knew the person was coming. I couldn't lock the door. For some reason, my fingers weren't working and started panicking enough that I managed to wake myself up. And so I'm just going to go to the next dream here. Apologies, it's like the day has started here. It must be coming night there. This dream here is a musician therapist, earthy woman in her mid 30s. Met originally through psychotherapy training together. Very, very kind person. So grew up in that Steiner Waldorf education system. Incredible singer, really powerful voice. Um, Sort of came to our analysis. She did consecutive, I wrote dark relationships, but this crisis, as someone once said to me, Hans Ulieta, one of the directors, oh, we welcome a crisis in Jungian psychology. Um, but she came because she's had these two consecutive breakups with men that have, really wounded her. It's worth noting her parents split at a crucial stage of her life. It was a real sudden one when she was just entering her teenage years. And I would describe her as someone, she's a bit like a lighthouse. They shine bright and but they can also attract moths. That's how I would describe it. But a very, very kind and likable and earnest person. And this is her. So we caught up. We hadn't seen each other for quite a while. She talked about she'd like to do some Jungian analysis, and we have a chat. And then she has a dream that night, and this is her dream. I am on some kind of excursion. I go off on my own, exploring on my own. I'm not with anyone. I'm in a floating city, a beautiful, magical floating city where people are living in these kind of tent houses, which are really mystical. And there are flowers and lotus gardens growing around these beautiful tent cities. I go into one of them, and it is a healing tent. There is a man in there who is the healer, and I'm curious about what he does. I want to speak to him, but he doesn't speak English. And I just to be remiss not to go straight to the symbol of the lotus. In Buddhism, it represents the path to enlightenment and the purity of body, speech, and mind. It symbolizes the overcoming attachment and desire with the lotus emerging from the mud. And, it's worth noting quickly here, she doesn't work in a flower shop or, so this lotus, like as Jung might call it autochthonous revival. It came from a much more deep place. Like literally here, the lotus emerging from the mud, the karmic cycle to blossom in the sun. In Hinduism, it symbolizes divinity, fertility, prosperity, and beauty, often associated with deities like Lakshmi and Vishnu. It represents the unfolding of the soul and is linked to the chakras, these energy centers, like Charles Eltz's wonderful presentations. Ancient Egypt, it represents the sun, creation, and rebirth as the flower closes at night, then opens at dawn, mirroring the sun's cycle. And this sort of wise Senex aspect of her animus, beyond her current animus projections, the man there, the healer. And I love how he doesn't speak English. One of my favorite ever lectures in Zurich, I just remember, you get these lines. I wouldn't say favorite, but you get these lectures or a line in a book or something in a film or a song, and I can't remember who it was. They said, "Look, it's this simple. The psyche doesn't speak Swiss German, it doesn't speak Korean, it doesn't speak English, it doesn't speak French. It speaks in symbols." And here we have this Senex kind of figure. I want to speak to him, but he doesn't speak English. And to me, with this Analysand who has deeply powerful dreams, it was time to live a more symbolic life and to own up to the symbol world. And I'm happy to share about 2 weeks ago, I got a dream from her, and it said this a lot. So this is a year or so later. She's been through definitely a neck here, a dark night of the soul. There's no doubt about it. And in this dream, she dreamt of a smaller, this is really beautiful, dreamt of a smaller river rising from below a main river, and it was washing away all the barren land and then joined up with the main river. And part of her healing journey has definitely been, getting away from the big cities of Australia and getting more time in the country and, you know, definitely some healing going on. And I'll just go to this next dream now, a little bit about the dreamer here. A technician, highly skilled technician, in potentia. So he's someone he's actually same age as me, so maybe a little bit younger. Very similar guy. He's very self-sufficient guy. No, didn't wasn't interested in Jungian analysis because he had a problem or depression. He was definitely on his own journey as a spiritual healer, and he was looking at all the different modalities and he was interested about Jungian analytic work and somewhat of an equal to me in many ways in journeys. A really nice fellow from a family, very interesting family. His mother has, as they would say in Ireland, has the gift. His mother is a clairvoyant and a medium, and his brother's a shaman, and a really interesting guy. So we had this, we had a really good chat. And I was like, "Oh, this would be great." He goes, "Yeah, I don't know how long I'll do analysis for, but I'm really curious." And so I said, "Great." Well, and I told him about my first analytic dream, and then this night he has this dream after our first session, and I'll just read it out to you. I'm sitting around a fire out in the jungle with a large pot of ayahuasca brewing on top. I don't notice anyone else around. A geologist turns up and is searching for something. I help him to find what he is looking for. Ian Chater then appears and is holding a red ribbon pin, and he says to me, "It's now time to start learning about the colors." We are sitting down on the floor. Now, what I love about this dream is we're both grounded. There's no inflation. We're grounded. We're sitting down. And the geologist turns up, and that's that shadow aspect for him of the depth work. He's doing his shaman work or his plant medicine work and his other modalities that he's interested in. And I love the idea of a geologist. You geologist look underground, and so this geologist turns up and we must map the underground of the unconscious. And I found it very interesting. And once again, there was a connection to Charles Zeltzer, who it was him that showed me before his talk at the Psychology Club. He said, "Ian, come and check this out." And he took me through the Splendor Solace, the copy that they have of it, or a representation of it at the Psychology Club. And this famous alchemical text from around circa 1582. And so here we have this image of the Knight of the Royal Art. And and the four colors of alchemy, the Negredo, the Albedo, Citrinitas, and the Rubedo, the four colors, and he's holding his in the right hand the sort of differentiation. In the left hand, he's holding a red ribbon, or like it looks like a. As soon as I heard this dream, I was like, oh my God. And there's three characters in this dream. There's the Nalisand, myself, and the geologist, and the fourth character in the dream, I believe, is ayahuasca. It's the spirit of Mother Nature, the wisdom of nature, and it's also worth remembering it can exterminate or enlighten the duplex nature of the chthonic world. The plant medicines, are, however, have been really therapeutic for him in the years prior to beginning analysis. But isn't it interesting? Jung saw the relationship between what the alchemists were doing and psychological process of the course of individuation. So here's a guy who's interested in, so what's the alchemical process and what's individuation? And the first dream was like, here's a red ribbon. And I showed him that picture and was like, oh, yeah, that's kind of it, isn't it? And I won't go into a full alchemical thing, but he's in the fountains of the gold and the silver, the solar and the lunar world. And I found that really moving, that dream, and very, just once again, evidence of the power of the psyche and what Jung saw, that these deep, like the river underground connecting us all. Now, I'll sort of riff a bit on this one. So we're going back a little bit in time now here, but this is, so I've just called this slide, I'll read it out. So three penguin synchronicity, or the irrational world, and to be or not to be, that is the question. And in brackets, I could write down an analyst. So this is a story that takes place on the day that I was going to send off my application paper to be to get accepted into the training program. I'd had several dreams where my analyst said, finally, I think you should apply. And I've talked about that before. And I was like, I don't know. And, it came this day to make this decision. I've just written here a quote of Tom Elsner's from his wonderful book, A Flash of Golden Fire, all about Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And this quote of Tom's from page 166: conscious engagement with the mystery of transformation is rare. How's that for a line? Conscious engagement with the mystery of transformation is rare. For one, it is hard for most of us to realize, even as an idea, that darkness, figurative death, depression, or regression is necessary for change. And so, like I said, I didn't want to, it wasn't my plan to become a Jungian analyst. The dreams come. My analyst Fritz says, yeah, maybe you should apply. So I write this paper. And anyway, on the day I was to send it, I was like, so right, today's the day. And I got up one morning and like, if I am going to send it, I'm going to drive to a town near where I live called Geelong and laminate it so it looks good and send it off. And I thought if I do go to Geelong, I'll also stop by what we call op shops, second-hand stores. I'm not sure what you call them in America, but, places where people donate stuff and you can go buy it cheaper or whatever. And I thought I'd stop off there to get a cheese. I just wanted a cheese grater for some reason. It was like the one of my childhood, just like, so, because I lived in a pretty remote shack. So I thought, well, if I go into town to laminate the paper, I'll, buy a cheese grater because I need one on the way in. But anyway, this morning I woke up, I was really stormy. I didn't know. I can honestly say I was really torn. I wouldn't say depressed. I was freaked out. I was like, because at that time I had an opportunity had presented itself to buy a shack that I was living in, and people in Australia will have a heart attack when they, this is what, 8, 9 years ago, I could have bought it for nearly $500,000, which even now still seems like a lot of money to me, but now would be worth three times that amount after COVID, everything changed. But so there was this real, like, do I buy a house and do I do that, or do I go Jungian analyst? And it was Shakespearean at the quintessence, to be or not to be. That is surely the most fundamental question. And so anyway, I'll tell you the story. So on the day, I'm like, right, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go down to the beach. And like I said, my early thesis idea was, surfing numinosum or oceana synchronicity. The beach is a huge place for me. And I thought I'll go down to the beach and make a decision. It was a very stormy day. And I went down to the beach underneath this lighthouse. Now, the lighthouse, and I was going to go down there and, ask the gods or whatever, like, what do I do? Do I send this paper or do I just go buy a house and not worry about it? It was literally like that. But the lighthouse in the town I was living in, they call it the lighthouse, at the Split Point Lighthouse, but local, it's known as the White Queen. Now, I just want to bring this in here because in the White Queen in alchemy, it represents Luna and Albedo, and she embodies the feminine principle. So there she is, the the feminine principle lighting up. And that's a picture I took with a rainbow. It wasn't that day, but it was the same time of year. It was stormy winter. She's associated the White Queen with the moon, silver, and the element of water. In the stage of albedo whitening, she represents the purification of the soul, intuition, and the washing away of impurities to achieve a state of spiritual reflection and clarity. But I've written here what was missing though from this scene, obviously now to me, is the Red King, the soul Rubedo, and he embodies the masculine principle. He's associated with the sun, gold, and the element of fire. In the stage of Rubedo, the reddening, he represents vitality, action, and the fixed spirit. He provides the transformative heat but necessary to finalize the work for the chemical wedding. And, really, the Red King is the opposite of the puer archetype. And I suppose I've been accused of it and I sort of accept it. I am a puer in some ways, but also have a lot of responsibility in life. But I do have that spirit. I still surf a lot and I love it. I don't own a house. I'm a bit of a nomad myself, but on this day, I find it really interesting. The Red King is missing, and one thing about it, the Red King, he's the opposite of a puer. And I've found this description of it as a someone that constantly getting their feet wet but never fully committing to anything. And I had to commit to the training. And so what happened was I went down to the beach, and I'm like, what do I do? And I went to this beach. It's called Stinky Beach. So once again, the gold is in the shit, so to speak, because the seaweed gangs up there and it gets very smelly. And look, and I'm telling you the truth now, I've been surfing in this coastal Victorian town for, I don't know, 7 years at this point, and I'd never seen a penguin alive or dead. I know on the other side of the bay, a couple of 100 kilometers away, there's a place called Penguin Island, but on this side, I'd never seen one. Anyway, I go down this day. Am I going to go to the center? Am I going to apply to the central? And there's this beautiful dead penguin on the beach in the seaweed, and it was a fairy penguin, a little fairy penguin. I'm walking on the beach. I see this penguin, and I had my penguin scarf on. Which this isn't so much the synchronicity, but I did have that scarf on, which I'd bought in the Falkland Islands when I worked on a documentary there years earlier. And I saw this dead penguin, and I just burst into tears. The penguin really, really made me really sad. And I saw this beautiful penguin. It was black and white with this wonderful sort of golden collar, and in alchemy they talk about the cauda pavonis, the color of the peacock. And so there's this black and white penguin with this gorgeous luminous sort of collar, and for some reason I wasn't thinking about the paper anymore. I was just really sad. It looked real. It was like this overwhelming sense of sadness. Anyway, I made a grave in and it was raining and stormy and windy and crap weather, and I dug a hole and I buried the penguin. I built a little stone cairn above him, knowing full well that the tide would come in and wash that away. I didn't need something that lasted forever, but I wanted to acknowledge him. I just want to say, a couple of things here. Penguins like a surfer, I suppose, adept in the ocean, but awkward on land, a bit like me. And it was Brigitte Jacobs, a thesis supervisor. She said, there's a Charlie Chaplin-esque nature to the penguin, isn't it? It's like, it's all fun and games, and it's like, but where's the seriousness? Like, so in this part of this penguin had to die. And there's another thing I want to say from Edward Edinger, his book. I think it's called The Eternal Drama, but I for the paper before the thesis, I had to do a symbol paper, and I did mine on the Greek goddess, an image of the Greek goddess Circe, or as they might say, Kirke, the Waterhouse painting of her holding the bowl aloft, sort of to work out, to work on the anima. And in reading that book, Edinger talks about how the molly herb, so the black and white, also, so but to when Odysseus gets to Aea, the island of Circe, he's Hermes, the patron saint of the unconscious, has said, listen, if you have this herb and blah blah blah, you'll be safe. You won't kill and you make relationship with your world, will be great. And to cut a long story short, this herb is black and white, like the penguin, and the molly it gives him. So and Eden just saw it as the opposites being ingested. So if Odysseus could integrate the opposites, he could make relation with Circe and learn from her and heal her as well, and then once again go back on his way to Ithaca. And like I said, this penguin had this beautiful shimmering, this beautiful collar. Anyway, so buried the penguin. It was like, right, I'm just going to submit this paper, and maybe the universe had to give me a kick in the ass to I don't even want to know what happened, but anyway, so I go to this is the next part of the story. So I go to here. Seaside Seconds, Anglesey Baptist op shop, second-hand store, and there's the cheese grater. And I walk in, and now at this stage, and I talked about this in my thesis, I would say I had two mother complexes, and everyone has a complex, a mother complex, a father complex, and whether it's good or bad, but everyone's got one. I always think of that line of Jung's, show me a sane man and I'll cure him. I had two mother complexes, and I talked about this in the thesis, my mother complex, the Irish mother I've got, and the maternal, and then the big one, the ocean, absolutely like addicted at this point to surfing in my life. I was like, all my life literally revolved around the tides. And so it's just worth noting that. So there's this one complex, then on the left, we've got the cheese grater, kind of felt to me like tied me to my mum. And on the right, the ocean, the penguin. Anyway, so I go into the op shop. Right, I've got to buy a cheese grater. Once I get the cheese grater, if they've got one, I'll then drive to Geelong and laminate my paper, send it to Zurich. So I go into the op shop, go out the back, forage around. Gold is in the dross. And there's a cheese grater just like the one on my child, and that's the actual cheese grater there. And I get up to the front of the counter, and in front of me there's a woman and a young boy. He could have been no more than 3 or 4 years old in front of me. And as I'm waiting for them, and he's smashing this thing on the counter, and he's like smashing it, and then bang, and this thing opens up. It was like a little egg in his hand, and he opens it up, and out came a penguin from the egg. And he says to his mum, "Mum, what is it?" And I went, it was really embarrassing. Like they must have thought there was a mentally unwell, unstable gentleman behind them, probably was. And I said, "It's a penguin." And nearly started crying. And they looked around at me like, "What?" And he literally did. He cracked a Kinder Surprise egg, and out popped a penguin. And the mother and the young boy, walk out, and I buy my cheese grater, and I was deeply moved by this synchronicity at the time. And I've just written here this quote from Regina Apt quoting Jung in her book. It's a great book, Animals and Animal Dreams, like people dreaming of animals that Regina's compiled. And anyway, she wrote here, or Jung wrote here, the Gnostics preach snake wisdom, that is the knowledge coming from nature itself. And as someone who is very interested in synchronicity, not like the kind of like, wow, I had a synchronicity, not a inflated thing, to me, a very graceful and grateful relationship to it. That people will spend years, and they will. How does it has it happen? Like scientists or whatever, quantum physicists, and all these different theories about it. And I just remember, reading von France, and she said, "Look, the most important thing is meaning." And so the meaning for me, and I'll just leave this with this, is like, and I realize now with hindsight, with great supervision and analysis, is that a part of me had to die. Um, Symbolic death. But look, the new penguin is born, and still surfing. I can't surf as the big as waves, or as I used to, or maybe I don't have much time. But that part of me had to die, and here I am now talking about the wisdom of nature, and quoting these books. It's a real journey. That was a moving day for me. And I just wrote here, what did I write? A new chapter had begun for me, individuation of my dreaming child, a songline. And Gary Sparks, another American analyst, I never got to meet him. Sadly, passed away, I believe. He'd lectured at the Zentrum. I'd missed his lectures, and I heard him a lot on the Speaking of Jung podcast. And he said one day, "Oh, synchronicity is just a little bit of your story dropped into time and space." And I thought that was a really cool description, a little bit of your story dropped into time and space. And I'm sort of getting near the end now. I hope, yes, a lot of questions, but thin places. And this is a quote from a woman I never met, but my Granny McComish, my Irish great grandmother, and my mum always tells me this. And apologies, I'll do the Irish accent here, but Granny McComish would say, "I don't believe in little people, but they're there." And I really, really, really like that line. I don't believe in little people, but they're there. No need to believe. I know. Um, Jung in the Red Book talking about these. There are things in my unconscious that I don't create. They're autonomous. I don't believe in little people, but they're there. And this is a picture from County Clare in the western part of Ireland, just south of Galway. It's a very powerful place. A dolmen there, a burial mound. And there is a saying in Ireland I always liked: heaven and earth are only 3 feet apart, but in thin places, that distance is even shorter. Thin places, as they are known, are locations where the veil between the material world, the rational world, and the spiritual realm, the irrational, is particularly translucent. These can be sacred and revered structures and spaces or deserts, ancient stone circles, and liminal shorelines. One could say in brackets underneath the shadow of the White Queen Lighthouse, or like remote sandy oceanic corners of Australia. These places are not merely physical locales, but psychic thresholds resonant with deep archetypal forces. An effective analysis should take place in a thin place. I really, I talked a lot. My final section of my thesis is called Analytical Considerations, and I argued strongly like a really powerful analysis should be like a thin place somewhere. That veil is thin, a psychogeographical temenos one can safely visit, and both analyst and analysand are transformed in touch with the unseen but ever-present unconscious world of the archetypes and ancestors, and the music and wisdom of nature and the helpful animals. And that I'll just share that. That's a thin place for me. That's the north bank of the Rhine. Germany would be 10 or so k's to your back. But we're in Switzerland in Basel, and that's the Basel Cathedral. Of course, the famous Basel Cathedral where Jung had his waking vision of his childhood, where he imagined God sitting on his golden throne in the blue sky, dropping the giant turd that crashes through the cathedral roof. Now, that is the thin place. I mean, I'll tell you why. A couple of years before about 2022 or 23, I'd written to the directors in Zurich and said, does anyone know anywhere I could rent a room or stay in Zurich? I wanted to go to Zurich, blah, blah. And I hadn't heard from anyone for a while. Some people, they wrote back going, oh, sorry, unfortunately not. And then one of the directors did and said, yeah, my brother lives and his partner live in Basel. And I was like, oh, Basel. And I'd only seen that in one of those early documentaries. I think it was, can't remember, was it Jung's grandson being interviewed about I can't remember his name, Dieter Baumann being interviewed on the banks of the Rhine, talking about Morgenstreich and the parades in Basel where they all dress up and sort of personas come out, as Oscar Wilde would say, the mask reveals the man. But so Basel had never been on my bingo card, and what was interesting though, about 6 months before that offer came to go to Basel, I'd had a dream, and it was a very simple dream. There was a river and all this green. It was like a vine. It wasn't dangerous. But it was like a bit like descriptions you hear of ayahuasca. Was this beautiful green vine, and I'm at a river with this vine, and there's an Indian woman next to me, and I said, "Where are we?" And this Indian woman, which is ironic, she said in German, "Das Rhein," like the Rhine. And then I said to her, what's your name? She said, Lakshmi. And I was like, all right, cool. And I was sort of forgotten about that dream. And then I get this offer to go to Basel. And then I was like, oh, and then I'm thinking about, well, that dream's kind of come true, but interesting. And then one day, I'd been belting out a day at the Basel University Library studying for my propedeutic exams. And I went and sat, this is that day, I went and sat there was a bit of sunlight, scarce sunlight in a Swiss winter, and sitting on the banks of the Rhine. You think of, the Romans have been there and the Celts, and just a wild history. And then, of course, that famous cathedral, Jung's dream, of course, the place of Jung's childhood as well. And anyway, I was sitting there. It wasn't the first day I was there. I've been there for a month or so at this point. At some point, these two Indian girls sat down next to me, and I was like, I won't talk to them. They look like tourists as well, and I kind of did, but. Anyway, one of them got up and walked off, and the other one was still there doing some reading. And when I went to leave, I said, "Oh, excuse me, like, are you from India?" She said, "Yeah, I am." And I said, "My sister and I are studying here." I was like, "Oh, cool." And I said, "It's a nice place." And she said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm curious, what's your name?" And she said, "Lakshmi." And I was like, I didn't say, I was like, "Great, have a good day." But what I wanted to share, though, these synchronicities, you read about the Hindu goddess Lakshmi. She has a sister as well, and I always took this as a really good reminder that synchronicities shouldn't have this wow factor or like, oh, amazing, I haven't seen. It's like there can be another thing to them. The reason I say this because that was amazing that Lakshmi was there, but I always remind, but she had a sister who had departed and I hadn't got to talk to or meet. And in Hindu mythology, Lakshmi's sister is called Alaxmi, and her sister is about darkness and poverty. And I just remember thinking about this. So that dream, Lakshmi's there, the goddess of light and prosperity, but I never got to meet her sister, and or maybe I'd met her in my earlier life. But I just remember thinking like how, you know, I think the danger you see with an Alisand's like, oh, I had a synchronicity, it's amazing. And I think it was Gary Sparks that talked about it. It can also herald that you're on the wrong track as well. But I took it as I was on the right track, but to really stay grounded. Um, that's how I. But it was incredible that Lakshmi and she would be there by this thing and this bar, dust, rain. So this once again, this time space kind of issue of the collective unconscious, and that early quote of Jung's, there's a dreaming going on underground the whole time. So it's my Aboriginal friend said, of course it is. There's this other world, and when we're children, whether your First Nations people, who are really living that, they're still out there in the desert. We're closer to this other natural world, and unfortunately, the more we've got consciousness, we're kind of estranged from it. But if we can be conscious that we're coming away from it, that's half the battle. In fact, one of my chapters is called "Wide Awake in the Participation Mystique." So somehow becoming aware that you're in the soup is half the battle. And look what Jung did with the Red Book. It's the quintessence of that battle. And just saying on this quote too, I thought this is interesting too. While we're at Basel, and Jung was once talking about Basel University, I think, and he said, he read once that he said that any ideas or beliefs of God or a new or a numinous spirit world were verboten, were forbidden at the university. And Jung thought it was ironic because it was the same universities that taught theology. So, you couldn't believe in God or think, but we'll teach you theology. Um, I thought that was very interesting. So another thin place for me here. This is a beach on the edge of the Great Sandy Desert. That's a sunset with a sort of bushfire smoke, a very, very golden, luminous place. And I've written here to encounter a thin place in analytical psychology is to be drawn towards an encounter with the self, that mysterious center and circumference of the psyche. It is to step beyond the ego's defenses and put oneself at the mercy and grace of the spirit of transformation and connect to the autochthonous aspect of the depths with the emerging spirit of the times on the path of individuation. Um, Vine Deloria Jr., in God is Red, he said this the vast majority of Indian tribal religions, therefore, have a sacred center at a particular place, be it a river, a mountain, a plateau, a valley, or another natural feature. This center enables the people to look out along the four dimensions and locate their lands to relate all historical events within the confines of this particular land and to accept responsibility for it. And Deloria Jr. says this. He says, one is space, so brackets place, two is time, three is power, so the energy, and four is relationship or relationality. And I believe that that could be a fourfold way of understanding a good analysis here: the space, the place, and the time, and the power that's brought in with it, and the respect, and also the relationship. And you learn that enough, like any great, if there are any hope of any therapeutic change, surely would be driven by a positive relationship. Or it doesn't have to be I suppose it could be even a negative countertransference can have its benefits, but definitely for me it's been a very strong relationship, one of trust. And but I just love how Deloria talks about that land. And just on that book, God is Red, the last time I talked to you guys, that I was, I was the first time I'd done a public talk through Zoom, and I was really freaked out and I was worn out, and it was pretty uh, personal stuff. The first person that contacted me was Tom Elsner. Within 20 minutes of finishing talking to you guys, he wrote me an email. I said, "Hey man, like, hope you're okay." Like that was it was like you really bared your soul. It was great. And then he said, "Oh, it was really interesting. This morning I was at Monica's place doing some stretching, and I looked up in the bookcase and I saw this book, and I was like tracked him and I saw like God is dead. Oh, God is red." And so I pulled it down, and then you talked about it. So and then Tom says, "I figure I better read the book, look after yourself, and we'll speak about starting the supervision soon." And that was the one of the last emails I had with Tom. And yeah, just wanted to share that. And here's another quote of Vine Deloria Jr. with this beautiful, I find this like a fairy ring of boab trees or lulgody trees, as the locals call them in the Kimberley, as the sun's coming up in the desert. And Vine Deloria Jr. here in God is Red said, thousands of years of occupancy on their lands taught tribal peoples the sacred landscapes which they were responsible, and gradually the structure of ceremonial reality became clear. It was not what people believed to be true that was important, but what they experienced as true. And I'm just going to say that again. It is not what people believed to be true, but what was it that was important, but what they experienced as true. And that's holding witness to people. And I was thinking Von France talking about when she first met Jung, was it at Bollingen Tower, and she described him as like a Methuselah, some old man, and he kept going on about, the woman, his Berkowitz patient had been to the moon, and she said he believed it. She had really gone to the moon, and this is it. It was not what people believed to be true, what they reported they experienced as true, and very powerful line for me, that one. And I just want to finish off, getting to the end now with bringing Yeats and Jung back together. American scholar James Olney wrote this incredible book called The Rhizome and the Flower, The Perennial Philosophy of Yeats and Jung from 1980. And here's the quote here. Yeats thought of philosophy as a transition from a state of unconsciousness to consciousness. And mythic tales, seance spirits and angels and the dead, like visions and dreams, all rise up from the unconscious as ancient as the night. To startle and dismay or to delight are ephemeral consciousness. Jung took the same view of the matter when in Psychology and Alchemy he remarked that night after night our dreams practice philosophy on their own account. And again in Psychology and Religion, where he describes the provenance of all such psychic figures and expressions. The unconscious is the matrix of all metaphysical statements, of all mythology, of all philosophy, so far as this is not merely critical, and of all expressions of life that are based on psychological premises. The unconscious, Jung argued, and Yeats agreed, is everywhere and at all times pretty much the same, and so serves to unite men in the darkness of the night, while consciousness is everywhere different and divides them in the light of the day. It's good to see Yeats and Jung on the same page together there. And this is the last slide. This is a photo I took at a remote First Nations community. God is feminine, dark hands coming down from above, like Isis or the healing spirit of Mother Nature herself. The dark and mysterious feminine, this image is coming down from above. And there's the child of the future potential turning left into the unconscious to the tree of life. And I wrote here to pick as W.B. Yeats wrote in his poem, The Song of the Wandering Angus, the silver apples of the moon or the golden apples of the sun. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Um,
Do I
is-
unshare here or?
yeah, stop the share. Then we can
All
see
right.
you, hopefully.
All right. How do I stop the share? I'll go one sec. Sorry about this, guys. I'm not the. Here we go. The share. Go back to there, I think.
Up at the
Does that work?
top, no, up at the top of the screen on mine.
Stop share. Got it.
There you go. You did it.
Thanks, Judith. And everyone, you should know Judith helps people like me before these talks and I'm very grateful for that, Judith. Thank you very much with all the technology stuff.
Well, sensation's not my strong function either, but I guess I have been trying to develop it, so I guess that means I'm on the path to redemption.
Yeah, hope so. Yeah, it's still
Hope so.
ongoing.
You're right. Um, so we have a lot of time now for questions and discussion, and there was so much in there. Maybe too much. People have to absorb it because nobody's raised their hand yet. It takes a while to absorb everything and for people to come up with a question or a comment. I'm waiting.
It's just started raining
There we
here.
go. There's two people. Okay. I'm going to send, oh no, they've changed how I do this. I have to find it. Allow. Oh, goodness gracious. There we go. Okay. I have a new way now that I ask people to unmute. So we have Shani Stepikoff first. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Okay.
can.
First of all, I just preface this by saying that I really, really enjoyed your talk. And It's a lot to absorb. The lack of raising hand was not because of a lack of response. It's just a need to digest and process. But I just wanted to take this opportunity in the meantime, in case you're not already familiar, to let you and others know that there is a Jewish American writer who was a short story writer and also known as a poet, named Delmore Schwartz, Schwartz, who wrote a very important story called In Dreams Begin Responsibilities. And it's actually the title story for a book he wrote of short stories and poems. And it's an extremely powerful, unforgettable story. And because I believe in synchronicity, and your talk is called In Dreams Begin Responsibilities, and you're interested in literature, I just wanted to mention that you might find that story very powerful to read. It's again by Delmore Schwartz. He wrote it around 1930 or so, late
Yep.
20s, and just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for sticking through the whole talk. I appreciate it. I think the Hollywood film there was one decade or so called In Dreams. I think it was that Spielberg? I'm not sure. I'm not a movie, but I think that was a reference to that thing. And I had heard about that book obviously because I was obviously did a quick. Has anyone in the Jung world used this yet? And they hadn't. But no, thank you very much. I'll check it out. I appreciate it.
Next we have Anne Marie Ferrero.
Hi, I just really wanted to thank you for this extremely moving talk. I was just so moved to my soul, really, and that's really all I wanted to say. Bringing in your experiences and how it led you, through synchronicity to your studies. It was just really, really amazing, and I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne Marie. I appreciate it. I don't know if you could pick up. I actually nearly started crying when I was reading out the Storm Boy
Oh yeah, I'm crying right now.
section.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could just yeah, just it's and I once again I just want to bring his spirit into the room. Tom Elster and I, when we became friends, we had a couple of really long walks in the Swiss mountains together, and we were just talking about those texts, those things in our childhood. Like all of us, you know, we just to stay really close to those things that really enchanted us when we were children. And I'm trying to honor that, I suppose, with Stormboy. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Anne Marie.
Thank you. And also for your sensitivity and your vulnerability in sharing this with us. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, I think people are a bit overwhelmed. Now, we've got, I think we have Shani back. Yes?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. So, I really liked your list of texts that you felt through a Jungian interpretation um, capture this concept of the union between um, I can't pronounce it, the autochthonous,
Think of TikTok, like my friend taught
yeah,
me. So
autochthonous,
autochthonous, yeah.
yeah, and the civilized. And I did want to ask you, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you seem familiar with a lot of different literature, so maybe something will just come to you. It seemed to me that the examples you gave, although you did include Lady Chatterley from Lady Chatterley's Lover, but for the most part, they were men. There was Gilgamesh and Enkidu. There was Moby Dick with Queequeg and Ishmael. There was Zorba the Greek, with I forget the name of the other character in that one. There's Mellows, of course, with Lady Chatterley, Narcissus and Goldman, Huck Finn and Jim. Don Quixote, of course, I assume you mean Sancho and Don Quixote. But
Yeah.
I was just wondering, can you think of maybe any example that would have the feminine version of that? Yeah.
Well, I'm sure there are, and I did think of that late in the piece, and one of the reasons I put Lady Chadley in there was because it had the man and the woman in it. Yeah, not right now. I can't, but I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are. There's probably numerous, and this was part of the one of the bits I was looking forward to most was at the end was like hopefully people could throw some ideas back at me. I'm sure there are ones. I'm not sure if anyone else. Can you think of any? I'd be really grateful if you could. I'm sure there are out there.
Well, I mean, when I normally think of great works of literature and Jung and the individuation journey, I usually think of Jane Eyre and Charlotte Bronte, but the problem is I don't see that as an example where there's a second character that would represent, as two opposites. I see it more as just her herself developing these qualities within herself, but I don't see that friendship or relationship aspect in the same way. But
There's definitely some indigenous creation myths I've seen where there's like a matrilineal kind of thing where the older woman takes the younger girl and shows her like the Pleiades or the Seven Sisters or whatever. And there's definitely that. But I was trying to find, yeah, ones that sort of fitted this frame, whereas like this, unless you bring these two bits together, there's no forward movement. One's it's like they complement each other.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I should have. Yeah, it's just I did. It was interesting because I did when I put Lady Chan. I was like, oh, good, get a woman in there, because I
Yeah, that
really
is a
went.
good example. But
Yeah, but like, yeah,
yeah,
when I read Zorba the Greek, when you read Zorba the Greek, the treatment of women in that book's terrible. It's awful. It's just a truth.
even with Lady Chatterley's lover, I mean, it's by a man, D.H. Lawrence, and also the figure that brings the wildness is still a man. It's still Oliver
Yeah,
Mellows. So it'd be interesting to
absolutely.
get like a female wild figure. Yeah, but
Yeah, I
thank
think
you.
that's why. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that's why I kind of try to angle it into more like maybe it's like an anima thing, so it's still her and her agency. But yeah, no, I know. And like I said, look at Lawrence. He goes out to Australia and calls it nervous and neurotic. It's like, hang on, maybe you're talking about yourself. So yeah, no, I'll think about that. I'm sure if anyone, please do email me if you have any suggestions. I do read a lot. I've actually just lately I've been reading. I think since I finished my thesis, been reading lots of Haruki Murakami just to go into this kind of dreamy, relaxed world where I don't have to and it's funny, I'd never read Kafka on the Shore by Murakami, but about 3 or 4 times in Kafka on the Shore, if any of you have ever read it, he mentions the term "in dreams begins responsibilities," and so I was found that fascinating. But yeah, Murakami, yeah, it's I find him he's an incredible writer. It's real. It's that sort of otherworldly writing. But thank you for that. I will think about that. I probably should have asked some friends of mine. I've got a friend Molly who's a literature lecturer in Michigan. I could have asked her, but I didn't. I just sat with ones that I could talk about because I'd read them, really would be why. Yep.
Thank you.
We did have a talk by a fellow Australian on Charlotte Bronte a while ago, and
Yeah.
it was about the father complex. It was about her father complex. So it was her and her father. That was Charlotte. Okay, we have another person, Mara Alverson.
Hi there. Ian, I enjoyed your lecture so much. The quality of intuitiveness that you exhibit, it was really inspiring as a fellow intuitive. And it made me think, oh, this paper I'm about to write, I could really do it from more of an intuitive place. So thanks for the inspiration. And the quote that you shared from your grandmother. I want to make sure I get it right because it was so priceless. I don't believe in fairies, but they're out there.
Yeah, you could say fairies. In Ireland, they call them the little people.
Uh-huh.
And the exact line is, I don't believe in little people, but they're there.
They're there. Okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, thanks, Mara. Your name, Mara, that sounds Irish. Mara, is it Mara?
It's actually found all over the world, that
Yeah.
name. But yeah, everywhere from the Bible to Buddhism to Ireland. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for telling me and sharing the talk. And yeah, isn't it is it's a great my 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 mother shared that with me not too long ago. I just love that line. I don't believe in little people, but they're there. And but it made me think about Jung in the Red Book. I think somewhere he talks about there are things in my psyche that I don't, they're autonomous, they're That's a collective unconscious. That it's magic. And I have had dreams in the Kimberley, in the chapter I talk about the Willy Willy, and this figure, right, nothing in my life I've not seen in a film. And I talked to the Indigenous, they were women elders, and I told them about this dream, and they're like, I won't go into the specifics of it, but this was something that existed in their pantheon, and I dreamt it. And so I do believe you get into that location, things happen, as Jung called it. Is it psychic mimicry? Something happens when we're in the soup, so to speak, in the depths. But yeah, they're there, whether you believe it or not.
Thanks for sharing that part of the world.
No, thank you. Thanks very much for watching.
Okay, we have Sasha Goldhar. Uh-oh, she went away. What happened to Sasha? Uh, Sasha, go ahead. Are you there? I can't hear you. You're not mute. You're unmuted, but we're not hearing you.
My headphone. How about now?
There you go. That's it.
Oh,
Got
sorry about that. I was just curious because a lot of the talk you were sharing about, um, you know, the process of deciding to pursue analytic training and sort of the early experiences of that journey. And now, as you're presenting with us, you're at the end of that experience. And I just wondered if there's anything you could share about how it feels to be on this side of the process.
I think that's a really good question. Uh, in dreams begins responsibility. I feel a lot of responsibility to the material. I think having that puer trait in me, the negative side of the puer, is like, I'd rather go surfing, not commit to anything, and to do this analytic training, it's not tiddlywinks, as we say. It takes a lot of work. It's the word association experiment paper first, and the fairy tale paper, and then you do your 8 Propedeutic exams, and then a symbol paper, and the symbol paper's an opus in itself, and then the thesis. And so it's a lot of work. And there was definitely a couple of times working on the thesis where I put down the laptop, and when have you ever read the book The Regeneration Trilogy by Pat Barker about the
Never
English
heard of it.
psychiatry? It's a really good book. I think it won the Booker Prize. It's all about the
Great.
W.H. Rivers, the psychiatrist working with the soldiers in World War One with what they called shell shock, we now know as PTSD. And there's a line in the book, it's not worth it. And a couple of times I was like, this is immense. But once again, going back to Gary Sparks, I heard him once say it's meant to be really hard to bring out your best. And so that's the training, because it's almost impossible at times. Not impossible, it just feels immense. But I'm looking back a bit now with really grateful eyes at some of the experiences. For instance, to meet a guy like Tom Elster, his week, he delivered 5 days in a row on the Ancient Mariner, and it was unbelievable. Like, it was such a living lecture, and he brought in surf, and he brought a story about 9/11 in, and a dream, and it was just like, whoa, like, okay, so you can be a Jungian analyst and have this kind of still be yourself. I think that's been the biggest lesson for me, is you've got to, my analyst says this, you got to know the scales before you can play the jazz. And I think I'm just starting to play the jazz now, which is good, but you have to learn the scales. And I like the fact they take it very seriously over there. And I think at the end of the day, though, and I said this in my exam, and this probably answers your question better than anything. At the end of one of my exams, they said, "Oh, so what are your, plans, or, blah blah." I said, "I just want to be a really good analyst. So I don't want to, change the world, or create some new Jungian theory. Like I said, the more I read Jung, the more I realize I don't know. And so, um, the ultimate judge of where this is a success or not, I suppose, is the people that come to see me and talk to me, and hopefully it helps them like it's helped me. And you are, and as Jung said, it's really successful therapeutic relationship where both the analyst and the analysander transformed, and I can feel that. And yeah, so I would say feelings of gratitude, but I can tell you that day on the beach, I was like, I remember going, I'm not doing this. I want to just surf and buy a house, and there's the dead penguin, and and there's lots of warnings. Editor talks about that. If you turn your back on the call, watch out, shipwrecks. So at time, but yeah, it's a life. I feel like it's a life. It's given me um a great sort of it's like it's brought in this whole other world, this magical other world, I'll describe it as. I think Sheila Langston, a fellow student, she's lectured, I think, to you guys. She's a Canadian analyst, and she said, "Isn't it great? We've got this whole other world." And I know what Sheila was saying. It was we get to have this other world. But yeah, it's hard. I wouldn't say it's easy. Maybe to some people it's easy. I'm not an academic. Even though I've done these degrees, the literature art degrees, it was sort of the psychotherapy one was pretty hard. It was mainly, but that was 10-month practicum that showed whether you had the right stuff or not. But this the thesis at times was I can honestly say it was definitely a few days walking through Basel going, oh, I can't be bothered. It's killing me, like, and then you get
Yeah.
those little breakthroughs. And for me, it was really nice to share that active imagination for me was a real breakthrough. Because sometimes you forget that, Jung, like the Red Book and all that stuff, like literally we've got a document of how a guy went down and then came up again, and to sort of go into that world safely and yeah, that was a bit. It's like I don't know. It's really yeah. It's a like last night I was lying in bed going, why am I doing this talk? Oh, the stress and Judith has. What if I can't get my power put on? What if there's a power blackout? Because there was a big storm here last night. But no, it is worth it. And if it helps one of my analysts deal with something that's not helping them get on their song line or their path, and it's worth it. That's why I see. I've always liked helping people and I've learnt though that by helping, working on ourselves for we can become better for other people. And I think the training is a real focus on that. Are
Well,
you are
I
you in
really got a
training?
lot from your talk, so thank you so much. Oh, what
Thanks.
was that?
Are you in training?
I hope to pursue it, but a lot of the things you're sharing is intimidates me, so we'll see.
No, 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 don't. You find your golden thread and you're fine. Like if someone said, hang on, how can a guy from Australia who hasn't got that much money, works with Aborigines, he surfs, he's got his own, how's he going to get through? I got through, you know what I mean? So, well, I'm not there yet. This is like the 11th hour of the fairy tale. I've still got I'm right at the end, but no, you can do it. Just, yeah, listen to the dreams and see where it takes you. I wish you
Yeah.
all the best.
Well, and bravo for all of your hard work. So I got a lot from your talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. Thank you very much.
Suddenly we have it's a bunch of raised hands. So I'm going to do new people, save repeat people only if we have time at the end. So Laura Cassman, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. I actually am in my thesis stage of my PhD right now, and everything you're talking about is kind of like enlivening me. And my whole thesis is about like the alchemical transformation that can happen during the act of art making. And I'm just kind of wondering, because a lot of my thesis also has to do with my dream work and art, and I'm wondering if like making art, creating art ever came into your analysis with your like analyst, or if you bring that into your room with your clients, or if that, I don't know.
Yeah, well, so one chapter, thanks heaps for the question and thanks and good luck with the PhD. One chapter in my thing, which is about Arthur Boyd, I started that chapter with that I used to have an art studio and I was a very crap painter, but I realized now it was probably self-therapy. But do you know
Yes.
the English painter Howard Hodgkin? Have you ever seen his work? It's like a very vivid. Check his paintings out there. He would paint them over the course of 5 to 7 years, but they were based on like in the French, the Intimates, but it looked like you were looking into like windows, very colorful, very powerful paintings. And I realized now it was self-therapy that I look at as Tom would have reminded me, look at the circles were fragmented. You could see something was trying to come into shape and all that sort of stuff. So art was definitely something in me, and that's one of the reasons why I can appreciate Arthur Boyd's paintings, not psychologically, but technically the guy could paint, he could actually
Yeah.
formally be internationally recognized as someone with talent. Um, I have drawn a lot of my dreams. I encourage I'm a terrible like stick kind of drawer, but I think, because I think it's really simple. You're just making, the more you can make unconscious contents conscious, the better. And so the problem is the ego goes, oh, you can't paint, or that looks shit,
Yes.
or whatever the shadow says that. But you just got to just try and get into that state. So that's why for me it was very interesting. The breakthrough for the thesis, I reckon, was that Arthur Boyd active imagination, because it was like an artist. So that was a bit in me, and the
Mhm.
alchemy of that because that's alchemy. What happened in the 90, to the Australian Indigenous people is by any measure just terrible. What's happened, and he's the guy in the 1950s. That would have been freaky. That series, it would have been, that's an artist turning shit, sorry, into gold, like, or not gold, but like we've got a, that's why I said it's a treasure brutal to attain. It's not a, and so I think art is really important. I always encourage my adolescents to, like, I've done dances to my dreams, like when no one's watching, of course, but I think art, I think it's maybe you shouldn't call it art, just call it, I don't know, what's another term for it in the therapeutic space? I'm not sure, just where you're just doing creative work to make the unconscious conscious. But yeah, it's isn't it, like, I think most great work comes from that real dark, so many works have come from that real dark night of the soul where people have transformed that suffering. And have you read Tom Elsener's book yet?
Mm-mm.
Uh, well, I highly recommend it because it's all
Okay.
about alchemy of art making through Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So it's called A Flash of Golden Fire. But he's a guy from your neck of the woods, and it's an incredible book, and it's literally about the alchemy of the creative process, I believe. Yeah.
Awesome.
Good luck with that PhD. Wow, that's a big
All
one.
right, thank
Dr.
you.
Laura.
Yeah. Oh my God, yeah. And thank you so much for introducing all of these artists and these names. I love like having new people to kind of like look into, and yeah, I love it. Thank you.
Great, no problem. And check out the C.G. Jung and the Sioux Traditions by Vine Deloria Jr. It's an underrated book in the Jung world. Like if you're interested in particularly the American First Nations and its congruence or separateness to analytical psychology, Jung's work, it's really powerful.
I will. Thank you.
No worries. See you, Laura.
Scheherazade, you lowered your hand, but I don't know if you did that on
No,
purpose.
here.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Ian.
Hi,
Thank you.
Sherazade.
Thank you so much for such an all-encompassing talk, theory, literature, and personal experience. Uh, the part that I'm very interested in, and you basically had the second section of your talk about that, which takes me to one of your slides, the discussion you're having about the dreaming and the autochthonous realm. I hope I said it right. This is the first time I'm not, uh, ignorant of Jungian psychology, but this is the first time I'm um learning about this term. And actually, you end with Jung's quote on catching a dream. I mean, we're dreaming all the time, or the psyche never stops, whether we're sleeping or awake. But when we're sleeping, the threshold of consciousness is so low that the dream comes. So I'm wondering about if you might have any experiences of yours or Aboriginal people, or people whom you met on this journey that will have told you about it or their experience of it.
Of that idea that you, like Jung said, you dip down and catch the dream sort of thing.
Yeah, actually, the dream. I mean, when you drip down, if you're making art or music or anything, that comes down, it comes from that part in the psyche. But I'm thinking about the dreams, actual dreams, like,
Yeah, well, one thing with my Indigenous friends, I've never really I've talked a lot about my dreams with them, and they kind of they're not daft. They keep keep you there and I keep them there. But I have shared some of my dreams with them, and like I can't really answer your question exactly, but maybe the best way I can explain this, when I first worked in the desert with indigenous people who were the last of the first contactees. So they were people that had walked out of the desert when they were 10 or 12 years old. So they were, it was like an incredible thing to be around that experience. So these are people that English was a third or fourth language, and they were completely connected to that landscape 40, 50, 60,000 years. And what I noticed with these people was, like, we get out of a car and you look down for snakes, or, check your phone, or, light a smoke or do whatever you do. These people would get out of the car like they were swimming underwater, and they would, and I'd say to someone like an anthropologist, what are they doing? They're like, they're talking to their ancestors, saying hello, we're back. And so this line of Jung's, I've got it here, we must assume the dream process takes place continually as a stream of psychical life, and it's only occasionally do we become aware of it, but it's going on like a stream underneath us. And to me, those people were in it, and like, people talk about telekinesis or ESP, or the Aborigines have a word for it, they call it a term for it, they call it the bush telegraph. And I like the amount of times I've been out somewhere and they're all talking and it all goes hushed, and like something, and then the satellite phone would ring, and sure enough, one of their daughters had just been injured in a car crash or something. Like, it was insane. Like, it was, I don't need to believe I know, that I don't believe in little people, but they're there. Like, it's this dream is going on the whole time. And so I think about, so Jung, obviously, with the Red Book, went down into it, didn't he? He could go down and consciously let himself fall, and but it's there. But I sometimes think you get whiffs of it. I don't know, like for this morning, for instance, I woke up, I had this really random song in my head. I was like, why is that song in my head? And then you think about the lyrics, and oh yeah, and that, but and if you're contacting that, then we would say that's the self's involved there. So there's something in us that wants us to heal or move forward. And so we've got to, as much as we can, become aware of that realm. And like going back to, was it Laura's question there, with that art world, you go back down into that world and you get like a ladle, or a little bit of its gold. I hope that answers your question. I sort of feel, to me, like it's always there, and it's how, I suppose my talk is too much rationalization. You think we're going, right into outer space further than we've gone before, yet we still don't know what's at the bottom of the Mariana Trench properly, or the Pacific Ocean. There is still this inner world that's untouched.
Beautiful, thank you. And believe me, the little people are there.
I believe you.
Yeah, they
Um,
are.
Whoops, we keep getting different people, so I keep not calling on the repeat one. All right. We are now at the end point that we're scheduled for. So people are certainly free to leave, people getting CEs, but we'll stay on just a little bit longer. So I do ask you to keep it brief at this point. So Bruce Gordon, go ahead and let's try to keep it brief.
Thank you. What really impressed me about this talk was the way you reflect the world you're moving through and embody the change that is being effectuated around you. And I'll just give one example, and maybe you can reflect on it. Well, when Michael died, so with him died this world that was sound and not noise. That's reflected in the painting where the gun's about to go off, but there's a bouquet of dream sound out of the ear, which is like the oracle, which is the speaking earth. And the three dreams you shared were all the oracle, the kind of opening of an oracle between you and your analysans. That was the invitation between you, where it was that moment where you had introduced and sort of proposed a working relationship, and then they honored that and created the ceremonial framework for that. I mean, I could go on, but I just love the liminal qualities, the penguin and the pelican, even the assonance of those two words, and the fact that rather than buy a house for yourself, you found a lighthouse that represented guidance for everyone that you could embody in yourself through the anima. And I would only lastly suggest that to try to look for examples where the lower, so-called lower nature, the Caliban to the Prospero, isn't necessarily immediately available in feminine projections, even though those are too rare in the literature. You do have Ariel and Miranda as two sources that recompose or reimagine the world and then need to be freed, each from their own captivity according to this architectonic masculine. So it's like the male is letting go.
Great. Thank you for that amplification around, yeah, that I only realize, you only realize this stuff later on, don't you? But and you said it really well though. But yeah, exactly, that gunshot killing that nature, when that death of my friend knocked me for six, really, as we say in Australia, really affected me. And there's a trauma still being dealt with there. That it is to lose your best friend. He got hit by a car on his bicycle riding home from school, and then he's just not there anymore. And that weekend we were actually we'd made a secret cubby house in the bush where we were going to be camping, and we had up lizards but no, I really, that's interesting, that really, that bang, that's the, isn't it, the shot of yeah, it's a good pickup. And I really appreciate that, the Ariel and Miranda pickup too. Thanks very much for your kind words, Bruce. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching, mate.
Okay, the last one. Although Phyllis Steele, you had your hand raised and then went away, but if you do want to speak, raise your hand so I know. Otherwise, our last one, we're going to have Shani Stepikoff back for the last comment.
Thank you. This is following up a bit on Sasha. I know that in Zurich there are three different institutes: the C.J. Jung Institute in Kusnacht, the ISAP one, and the Marie-Louise von Franz Centrum one. And I understand you went to the Centrum one. And I was just wondering if you could say a little bit about what made you choose that one out of the three.
Yeah, so pretty simple. That's where my analyst went. Frith Luton's my analyst, and she went to the Zentrum. She was originally at the Institute, and I believe the sort of, don't know the history of it, but people at the Institute split off and formed the Research and Training Center, according to C.G. Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz. So I went there because yeah, my analyst went there, and she said you should go there. She didn't say anything good or bad about the other places, but I sort of read about the Zentrum, and I think I checked out some of the people that had gone there, and I was like, yeah, this looks like the place that would, and also, but um, from the tyranny of distance point of view, for want of a better term, like from coming from Australia, allows you, there's 2 weeks twice a year. So it allowed me that chance to do other life and then try and get those 2 weeks free, whereas I think the other ones are much more immersive and you have to spend a lot more time there. And I don't know if you've been to Zurich, but it's not a cheap place. I think it's very expensive. So
Thank
yeah.
you.
No, thank you very much.
We do have Phyllis. By the way, I want to just say that one of my favorite things about the Zentrum is that the title starts with the word research. I love that. Phyllis Steele.
Yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciated hearing you talk about Tom Elsner, as I loved his writing and his lectures, and it was I really felt his loss too. And I also wanted to say I saw your lecture for the Jung Club here, and then I also saw you when you gave it in Zurich, which was wonderful.
I think I remember seeing you there.
With Holly Fincher and I were there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm hoping that you might give this lecture again in Zurich, because I'm kind of looking for it's getting a little hard for me to travel, but I'm looking for a good reason. And that was
hopefully. Oh, that's really kind of you. I better make sure I get all the thesis paperwork signed off first and potentially pass my last exams. As my analyst always reminds me, it's the 11th hour of the fairy tale. Just when the hero thinks he's got it, he slips on the banana peel or whatever. But and isn't it nice of Holly? It's Holly that recommends people like me to the from the Zentrum to talk to you guys. So I do remember distinctly talking to you at the club. It was nice.
Yeah,
but,
the quality of lectures from the Zentrum it's just always really good. And so I count yourself lucky that that's where you ended up, I think.
Yeah, and I think that reflects on the quality of lectures that we experience. So you're seeing a format of some ways, and I've seen it with the founding members. Then like Tom Elsner's, did you ever see his lecture on the Rime of the Ancient Mariner stuff? It was
Yes,
oh,
just
next
he's
level. But
just amazing, really amazing. It was so sad, so sad. But
yeah, yeah,
I can see why you guys were good friends. I can see
yeah.
the
I'll tell
kind
you a
of
story. We're out walking one day, and these directors walked past. At the point, Tom was telling me a story about Hollister Ranch, and it was like, I'm sorry, my Californian accent. It was like, oh man, it's got this thick right angle, and then it sort of bowls, and then it like throws out, and then you got to pull in. And I'm like, yeah, Bell's has got this section like that. It's really gnarly. It's sort of, and I'm sure they thought we were talking about alchemy or something, man. We walked, and he and I were giggling about it later. Like he was a very intelligent guy, but he had a lovely puer spirit about
yeah,
him too. And
yeah,
yeah, it's nice for me to on him. Like, yeah, I was really, really sad when he
this sad.
yeah, too
It was
young,
that. Yes, I
Yeah.
was moved by it, even though I obviously didn't know him. One more quick thing. Have you ever been to the Alchemy Museum in Basel?
No, but I've tried to go several times and other things have
Oh,
happened. I'll definitely go. I've heard it's
oh,
amazing.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
Really amazing. Anyway, thank you
Yeah.
so much.
No, thank you. Thanks a lot, Phyllis.
You bet.
So I want to explain that, in your story where you had the dream and then Judy sent you an email, but Judy sent you an email because Holly told Judy to send you an email.
Well, that's the circulation. But I remember like I had that dream. I was like, oh, that's an odd dream. I like Moby Dick. I hadn't read it for a couple of years, so obviously I've been around long enough to go, there must be something to this. Then I got back and read your email. I was like, oh wow. And because of my complex around PowerPoints and screen sharing, I was like, I'm never doing another one of those talks again. And I got that thing, and then okay, I'll do it. And then I'm really glad I did, Judith, because it went, hang on a minute, and to be honest, Phyllis, I think I was, not think I know, I was trying to honor Tom. I was doing a thesis about surfing, and it was like, I'm going to keep this guy alive, and somehow, and it was a really interesting paper, and it led me to some good parts, but it wasn't the thesis. And I had that dream, and then this offer, and, they talk about synchronicity and a causal meaningful coincidence. So it was a meaningful coincidence to me that I got that email. I went, okay, so what this dream's about? It's like, if you know the third chapter, there'll be a wedding, and the third chapter is where Queequeg and Ishmael share that bed. And I thought that there we go. And because I didn't want to also be that's the Australian guy that all he talks about is I'm being really honest now. I didn't want to be just like the only guy that talks about First Nations. I've got more to my life and
Hmm.
experience than just that. And also I really respect them. That's there. So that dream happened, and the confirmation from Judith and via Holly or whatever, but then that it opened up that other world, and I still managed to fit some surfing in there. I'm happy to say though.
And you are still very much honoring Tom Elsner, and it does mean
Yeah,
all of us. I mean, we had a number of lectures from him, and
he was so good.
we're all very sad. I mean, we've had a lot of deaths. We had Lionel Corbett, right? And then Tom,
Mm.
and so it's very nice when a speaker honors one of those people.
Yeah.
I think,
One last quick thing,
sure.
real quick. Um, I really notice and appreciate your honoring and respecting the privacy of the indigenous. You don't trade on it. You know what I mean? You use it, but you don't abuse it at all. And that's noticed and appreciated. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. So like I said, can you imagine if I took, I'm not saying the Swiss people do this or Americans do this or Australians do it, but imagine if I took 20 Aboriginal people to Iron Sealand, right, show us the Black Madonna, tell us where did it first come in?
Yeah.
These are our geologists. They'd be like, get out of here. And sometimes we've got to remember that,
Right.
and I
Because
think,
it's cheap and
yeah,
easy for people to do, and you don't do it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's
And I
noticed.
think
It's
you'll,
noticed.
Yeah, and Brian Delory Jr., one of his chapters, and once again, I think Mr. Bernstein, who's one of the editors of that book, was associated with your group, and it's such an important book for me. And one of the chapters is, Vine Delory Jr. takes great umbrage to some of the ways they're denigrated to savages and primitives, but generally that book's about like Jung, you know, we forgive him for using those terms, but he was definitely congruent. That Jungian psychology is very commensurate to the way we're seeing the world, and I find that really important. And like, I'm just lucky I've had the training at the Zentrum, and I've had this nearly 2 decades now of working with these First Nations people, and I've learned so much from them. Everything's got that twofold aspect, Jungian psychology, the positive aspect, seeing people completely connected to country, how they're in harmony with the seasons and they dig things and water comes up. And then the other side, when people lose their myth and that it's taken away from them or oppression or what happens, and you see they used to call it intergenerational trauma. And like I said in that talk, they call it malignant grief now, this all-pervading sense of grief that just kills them. And the fact, I always go back to it's got the highest youth suicide rate in the world. That tells you more than enough data that there's something wrong. If children are killing themselves, it's something's not right. And done my best in my own little part to try and get involved and with aspiration and mentorship. But I've learnt so much that their secrets should still be their secrets too.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they would love, particularly their stories, to be as respected as the other great myths of the world. And I hope I've tried to do that as well. So
Anyway,
Were you
much
referring to
appreciated.
Jerome Bernstein just then?
yeah.
His widow is on the program right now with us.
Oh, well,
Kristen.
thank you from the bottom of my heart. That book is a mate of mine, Haji Bakara. He's actually a lecturer. He's a Canadian, but he works at Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan. And he said, "Hey man, I think you need to read this book." And he got a copy of me. And I in my books, I'm currently sort of nomadic at the moment, but of all my books, there is not one book that's got so many tessellated, colored marks, or it's literally falling apart with. And I don't think I'll tell you this right now. I don't think I could have written a thesis without Vine Delory Jr.'s book, C.G. Jung and the Suit Tradition. So that's the effect it's had on my life. So thanks very much.
All right, I think we finally are done. And
Thanks a lot,
thank
Judy.
you so much. It's been really, really fun, really interesting. And good luck with finishing everything up. That's just so great that you're at that point.
Yeah, thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity and to give it, gets me sort of doing stuff, working. And like I said, my email was on that last slide, but if anyone wanted to write an email or whatever, I don't have a website. It's ian.chater@protonmail.com. I'd be happy to answer any emails or anything, okay? But
All
thanks you very
right.
much,
Have a
Judy.
good summer, everybody, and we'll hope to see you in September. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.